Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route to wonder. Tonight we're travelling somewhere colder, higher, and older than almost any place on the planet. A place that seems to touch the edge of the sky itself, yet hides stories that may reach back to the very beginnings of human civilization. The Himalayas, the roof of the world, stretching like a sleeping giant across Asia, are more than mountains. They're keepers of time, of memory, of secrets that may never have been meant to be found. If you're listening tonight with a cup of tea in hand, perhaps a blanket wrapped around your shoulders, take a moment to feel the quiet hum of the world beneath you. Maybe you're somewhere far from snow or stone, where the air is soft and heavy with warmth. Still, the Himalayas are with us all in some small way. They feed the great rivers that flow across half the globe. They shape the weather. They hold the clouds like folded silk. And maybe, just maybe, they also hold the traces of something much older than we ever imagined. Where are you listening from tonight? Somewhere coastal, perhaps, where the sea murmurs beyond your window, or maybe from a city where the lights never really go out. Imagine, for a moment, if those lights vanished, and all you could see was starlight reflected on ice. That's the Himalayas at night, a place so vast and silent that even time seems to move slower there, as if catching its breath between centuries. If you find these slow journeys through science soothing, or if the thought of mysteries buried beneath ancient mountains feels like a good companion for your evening, I'd be ever so grateful if you'd like the video. Maybe subscribe or share it with someone who could use a calm moment before sleep. It helps this quiet little corner of curiosity find others who might be awake wandering somewhere out there. Now take a deep breath and settle in, because tonight we'll travel upward and backward at once, into thin air and deep into the Earth's earliest memories. The Himalayas rise, but they also remember. And somewhere in that paradox, as in mountains that grow yet hide, might lie a secret that could change what we think we know about the dawn of civilization. The story of these mountains begins long before there were people to see them. Around 50 million years ago, the Indian subcontinent was not attached to Asia at all. It was an island drifting north across the Tethys Sea at a pace of a few centimetres per year. That doesn't sound fast, but in the timescale of Earth it was a sprint. When it finally collided with the Eurasian plate, the force of the impact was unimaginable. Two great slabs of crust met, and instead of one sinking beneath the other, they crumpled and folded like paper pressed too tightly together. The edges of both continents rose skyward, slowly, relentlessly. And that's how the Himalayas were born. Not in a moment of fire, but in a long, grinding embrace between continents. Even now that collision continues. The mountains are still rising, a few millimetres each year, though erosion and earthquakes constantly reshape them. In a sense, the Himalayas are alive, not in the way we are, but in a geological heartbeat that pulses through stone instead of flesh. Every tremor, every landslide, every snow-fed river cutting deeper into the rock is part of that living system. But hidden in that restless rise is a deeper question. What did the world look like before these mountains? Before their summits pierced the clouds? Beneath the ice and granite lies the memory of a vanished sea, the Tethys, whose sediments now form the highest strata of the Himalayas. Fossils of marine life, shells, corals, even the remains of ancient fish have been found at altitudes that touch the sky. Imagine standing near Mount Everest and holding a seashell in your hand, knowing it once lay at the bottom of an ocean. It's a strange, humbling reminder that the Earth is always rewriting itself. Oceans become summits, deserts become seabeds. Time folds in ways we can barely imagine. And yet, if the Himalayas hold the remains of an ancient sea, could they also hide the remnants of something more human? Archaeologists and geologists have long speculated about what might be buried beneath the snow, the rock, and the ice. When the Indian plate first struck Asia, entire ecosystems were buried, compressed, and thrust upward. Over millions of years, layers of sediment sealed away organic material, perhaps even traces of early human or pre-human habitation along the ancient shores of the Tethys. Of course, we can't simply dig beneath glaciers to find out, but satellite imaging and ground-penetrating radar have revealed ghostly outlines of structures, rivers and valleys now long hidden. There's a reason people have whispered for centuries that the Himalayas hide lost cities. Myths of Shambhala, the hidden kingdom of peace and wisdom, echo through Tibetan and Hindu traditions. The idea that something ancient and enlightened might be concealed in the heart of the mountains is older than recorded history. Some dismiss it as legend, others see it as metaphor, but a few wonder if there's something literal beneath it all. Ruins entombed under ice, waiting for the right thaw. In 2019, a team of geologists studying glacial retreat in Nepal uncovered what they believed to be remnants of ancient river terraces carved into rock tens of thousands of years ago. The pattern suggested that humans might have once lived much higher in the mountains than previously thought. The artifacts they found weren't monumental, no temples, no lost cities, but small, intimate things, shards of tools, fragments of pottery, faint marks of hands on the walls of shallow caves. Enough to remind us that civilization doesn't begin with stone cities, but with survival, with firelight reflected on a cave wall, with human breath carried on cold air. The question of Earth's first civilization is a complicated one. The Sumerians, around 6,000 years ago, are usually credited as the world's first urban society, but that label depends on how we define civilization: writing, architecture, agriculture, social complexity. What if, before Sumer, before Egypt, before the Indus Valley, there were smaller, earlier forgotten cultures? Ones that didn't leave written words but left their mark in other ways, through altered landscapes, ancient tools, or genetic traces in the people who still call these mountains home. The Himalayas stretch across modern-day India, Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet and Pakistan. 5 nations, but one immense geological story. And along its foothills, in places like the Indus Valley, we already know of ancient civilizations that flourished thousands of years ago. Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, cities with planned streets, advanced drainage systems, and intricate art. But those lie on the plains. Could their ancestors, or even earlier cultures, have lived in the high valleys before descending to the rivers? The glaciers might hold the answer, preserved in layers of ice that predate recorded history. One of the most fascinating ideas in modern archaeology is that civilization may have begun not in fertile lowlands, but in the mountains. Recent discoveries in Anatolia, such as Göbekli Tepe, have pushed back the timeline of complex human society by thousands of years. It was built around 12,000 years ago, long before agriculture or writing, a site of ritual and gathering built by hunter-gatherers. If such complexity existed in the hills of Turkey, could something similar have once existed in the Himalayas? The mountains, after all, have always been sacred ground. Standing among the peaks, it's hard not to feel that they're watching, not in any mystical sense, but as ancient witnesses. Every layer of rock is a page in Earth's diary, every snowfield a page still being written. Beneath the snow, there are layers of soil enriched with pollen from plants that no longer exist. Microscopic fossils tell of ancient forests that grew where glaciers now lie. If early humans passed through these regions during the last interglacial period, when the climate was warmer, they might have settled in the valleys, drawn by rivers, wildlife, and shelter. As the ice returned, those settlements would have vanished under snow and time. What draws us to this mystery isn't just the possibility of lost civilizations, but what it says about us. The idea that human history might be deeper, more intertwined with Earth's geological changes than we realize. Civilizations rise and fall, but mountains persist, holding their stories in silence. And when we look up at those snowy peaks, we're not just seeing rock and ice, we're seeing history in cross-section. Some scientists have even suggested that traces of human habitation could exist beneath glacial layers that are tens of thousands of years old. Deep ice cores might one day reveal soot from ancient fires, or even microscopic evidence of agriculture or metallurgy. carbon residues, isotopic anomalies, chemical fingerprints of early human activity. It's not far-fetched. We've already found signs of prehistoric mining in other mountain regions like the Andes, where people worked at altitudes once thought uninhabitable. The Himalayas, though, are harder to read. The scale, the danger, the constant geological upheaval, it's like trying to study a book while the pages are still shifting. Earthquakes expose new layers and destroy evidence in the same instant. Landslides bury sites faster than we can find them. Ice preserves and conceals at once. The mountains keep their secrets well. Still, there's a sense of something waiting there. The air itself seems heavy with memory. The wind moves differently through the valleys, carrying echoes that sound almost like voices. Though perhaps that's just our need to hear stories in every silence. The Himalayas have been home to monks, hermits, shepherds, and explorers for millennia, each leaving behind traces of their presence. Yet the mountains themselves predate all of them by epochs. Their scale reminds us how short our own story really is. Maybe that's why myths persist about hidden worlds beneath the peaks. From the Buddhist tales of Shambhala to the Hindu stories of the celestial Mount Meru, the idea of a secret origin hidden within the Himalayas isn't new. Some interpret these stories as spiritual metaphors, others as distorted memories of real events, perhaps floods, migrations, or encounters with ancient cultures long gone. And while science seeks evidence, myth preserves emotion. The sense that something extraordinary once happened here, something that left its imprint not on stone tablets, but in the human imagination. The Himalayas are not merely obstacles or borders, they're bridges through time. Their valleys connect epochs as easily as they connect nations. Snow melts into rivers that feed billions of people today, carrying sediments that may contain the dust of forgotten civilizations. Every particle washed downstream from those peaks has travelled through deep history. Perhaps the mountains don't hide secrets after all. Perhaps they simply release them slowly, one grain at a time, waiting for us to notice. When we speak of the Himalayas, we usually think of height, but their real power lies in depth, the unseen layers beneath, the quiet archives of Earth's memory. Scientists call it uplift. Poets might call it resurrection. But whatever the name, the result is the same. The past is not buried beneath the Himalayas. It has been raised into the sky, and now we stand at its feet trying to read the story in the stones. As we move further into this journey, we'll look deeper into that story, not just the geological one, but the human one. How rivers, myths, and science all braid together into a single flowing question. Could the Himalayas be the birthplace of our earliest civilizations, or are they something even older, the keepers of worlds we've yet to imagine? The higher we climb, the quieter the world becomes. Air thins, sound fades, and what remains is the steady pulse of wind moving across stone, a rhythm as old as the planet itself. To understand what the Himalayas might be hiding, we first have to understand what they are, how they breathe, how they came to stand where oceans once rolled. For all their majesty, the Himalayas aren't static monuments. They're the restless outcome of a planet that never truly sits still. It's easy to think of mountains as solid, permanent and ancient beyond comprehension. But in truth, they're the most dramatic expression of motion the Earth can produce. Underneath every valley, under every glacier, under every snowfield, the world is still shifting inch by inch. The Himalayas are the result of a collision still underway, a slow, grinding handshake between continents that began tens of millions of years ago and hasn't ended yet. The ground beneath them isn't at peace. It's folded and faulted, layered like a book whose pages keep being rewritten. Imagine the scene. Long before there were mountains, the world was warm, humid, and lush. The Indian plate, freshly torn from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, was drifting north, moving faster than any other tectonic plate at the time. Beneath tropical skies, it sailed across the Tethys Sea, carrying forests, rivers, and life with it. For tens of millions of years, it inched closer to what would become Asia. Then, around 50 million years ago, it struck. The seafloor between them crumpled and vanished. Sediments rose, hardened, twisted. Rock became sky. The Himalayas began their slow climb toward the heavens. If you could speed up time, the movement would look almost alive. You'd see the plains of northern India ripple like fabric pushed from beneath, peaks rising and collapsing in waves. The surface of the planet would seem to breathe, expanding and contracting over millennia. It's a reminder that the Earth, though solid underfoot, behaves more like a living body than a static object. It has heat, circulation, and rhythm. Mountains are its exhalations. At the heart of this process is something called orogeny, the birth of mountains. It's not a single event, but a continuous cycle. Rock rises through tectonic pressure, then erosion wears it down, carrying sediment back to the lowlands where it's compressed again. Over and over, the crust recycles itself. Every mountain, no matter how tall, is both ancient and new at once. The Himalayas may be the youngest major mountain range on Earth, but they hold within them fragments of the oldest rocks known. As the Indian plate plunged beneath Asia, enormous pressure transformed ordinary rock into something new. Limestone became marble, shale became slate, sandstone became quartzite. These metamorphic layers now form the bones of the range, visible in their pale bands and streaks of colour. To geologists, they are a record of transformation under unimaginable heat and force. To anyone standing there, they're simply beautiful. The Himalayas stretch for about 2,400 kilometres, from Pakistan in the west to Bhutan and Arunachal Pradesh in the east. Along that span, the Earth's crust has doubled in thickness, pushed upward into jagged ridges, sheer cliffs and hidden valleys. The air changes as you ascend, thinner, drier and cleaner, as if the impurities of the world below can't follow you up here. Yet the higher you go, the more fragile everything becomes. A single tremor, a small shift in temperature, can send avalanches roaring down slopes that have held steady for centuries. It's a place of extremes, violent creation and delicate balance coexisting in the same breath. Scientists studying this region often describe it as a living laboratory, a place where we can watch the planet's geological machinery at work. Every year, GPS instruments record that the Indian plate continues to move north at about 2 centimetres. That might not sound like much, but it's enough to cause earthquakes that reshape entire landscapes. In 2015, a massive quake struck Nepal, shifting Kathmandu several feet southward in a matter of seconds. For those who lived through it, it was a human tragedy. For the Earth, it was simply another adjustment in a process that began before humanity existed. From a geological perspective, the Himalayas are not so much a wall as they are a hinge. To the south lies the Gangetic Plain, flat, fertile, densely populated, and to the north, the vast Tibetan Plateau, sometimes called the Third Pole because of its enormous ice reserves. Between them, the mountains act as a barrier, a climate machine, and a water source for nearly 2 billion people. The range gives birth to some of the world's greatest rivers, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Indus, the Yangtze, and the Mekong. Every drop of water that begins as snow on those peaks will one day end its journey in fields, cities, and deltas far below. That steady meltwater has shaped civilizations for millennia. The rhythm of Himalayan snowmelt still governs the growing seasons in India, Bangladesh, and beyond. Entire cultures, economies, and belief systems are intertwined with the mountain's seasonal breath. In that sense, the Himalayas are not just the roof of the world, they're its lungs, exhaling life across continents. But the roof of the world is not a single peak or even a clear boundary. It's a region of extremes and contradictions. Mount Everest, known in Nepali as Sagarmatha and in Tibetan as Chomolungma, is the most famous summit, but it's only one of hundreds that pierce the jet stream. Around it, ridges rise and fall like the frozen waves of a petrified sea. The weather can shift from serene stillness to chaos in minutes. Pilots who fly over the range describe the turbulence as a living thing, invisible, unpredictable, and merciless. Yet for those who climb, there's something magnetic about that desolation. Standing on a Himalayan summit, even for a few minutes, is like standing outside of time. The scale of the landscape compresses the human sense of self. Mountains stretch beyond the horizon, their shadows painting the clouds below. The air tastes metallic, dry, pure. It's hard to speak, partly from thin oxygen, partly from awe. At that altitude, you can see the curvature of the Earth. You can feel, in your bones, the shape of the planet itself. And yet, as otherworldly as it feels, this high world is connected to everything below. When winds sweep across the Tibetan plateau, they carry dust that eventually settles over the Pacific. Minerals from Himalayan rock feed the soil of distant farmlands. Even the monsoon, that vast seasonal pulse of rain, depends on these mountains. Warm air rising from the plains meets the cold barrier of the range, condensing into clouds that drench South Asia. Without the Himalayas, the monsoon would not exist as we know it. Without the monsoon, much of human civilization in that region would never have flourished. It's a strange thought, that towering stone walls of unimaginable height are, in a way, farmers' allies. The mountains catch the rain, hold it in ice, and release it slowly, feeding rivers like veins in a living body. And when the glaciers retreat, as they are now doing faster than ever, they reveal more than just rock. They uncover what has been hidden, fossils, sediments, sometimes even hints of ancient human life. The mountains are archives, slowly thawing. One of the most striking features of the Himalayas is how young they are. 50 million years may sound like a long time, but in geological terms it's the blink of an eye. Compare that to the Appalachian Mountains, worn down to gentle hills after hundreds of millions of years. The Himalayas are still sharp, still jagged, still growing. And because they're young, they're unstable, steep, fractured, prone to landslides. Each of those slides reveals new layers, new glimpses into the Earth's deep past. For scientists, every rockfall is a page torn open from a hidden book. Sometimes those pages contain surprises. Fossilized shells found near the summits of some peaks confirm that the land was once underwater. Traces of tropical plants embedded in metamorphic rock tell us that the region once lay near the equator. There's even evidence of ancient microbial life preserved in high-altitude sediments, organisms that adapted to cold and pressure in ways we're only beginning to understand. These microscopic survivors could help scientists learn how life endures in extreme conditions, perhaps even offering clues to how it might persist on other planets. The Himalayas also hold something else. Stories written in human tongues instead of stone. For the people who live in their shadow, these mountains are not just geography. They're ancestors, gods, teachers. In Tibet, many peaks are considered sacred, each with its own legends. Mount Kailash, for example, is said to be the centre of the world, the axis around which the universe turns. In Hindu cosmology, it's the home of Lord Shiva, the eternal ascetic. Pilgrims travel hundreds of kilometres to circle its base, believing that a single circumambulation cleanses lifetimes of karma. In Nepal, Bhutan and India, mountains mark not only physical but spiritual boundaries, places where the earth meets the divine. It's no coincidence that so many of humanity's spiritual traditions trace their roots to high places. Altitude seems to evoke awe, humility, and the sense of being closer to something beyond comprehension. But it also serves a practical purpose. High ground preserves. Caves and frozen valleys can shelter artifacts for millennia. Ancient monasteries cling to cliffs, built on foundations that may once have been something else. Older dwellings, perhaps, or even remnants of settlements that predate written history. Some archaeologists quietly wonder how many ruins might be hidden beneath those religious sites, layered like time itself. For decades, expeditions have sought evidence of early human activity in the upper Himalayas, and slowly findings are accumulating. Stone tools dating back 30,000 years have been uncovered in parts of Tibet and Nepal. Traces of hearths, animal bones and pigments suggest that people not only passed through these regions, but lived there seasonally, perhaps even permanently. Genetic studies of Himalayan populations show adaptations for high-altitude living, efficient oxygen use, unique hemoglobin responses, traits that likely developed over thousands of generations. Those adaptations are signatures of deep time, written not in stone, but in DNA. Still, for every discovery, there are 100 unanswered questions. Did early humans venture into these mountains to escape changing climates elsewhere? Were they drawn by resources, obsidian, salt, water, or by something more intangible, like safety, isolation, or even curiosity? The mountains can give, but they can also erase. Wind, snow, and earthquakes erase footprints quickly. What we find now are echoes, fragments, and traces, not complete stories. Yet the very difficulty of studying the Himalayas may be what keeps their mysteries intact. Inaccessible valleys, unpredictable weather, and sheer geological chaos make exploration painstaking. Satellites and drones can map the terrain, but they can't replace the human experience of standing on that ground, feeling the thin air and the immense silence. Each expedition brings back not just data, but a reminder of how small we are in the face of geological time. From space, the Himalayas look like wrinkles on a sleeping giant, but up close, they're more like a cathedral built by the Earth itself. Every layer, every fold, every frozen ridge tells a story of pressure and release. To walk there is to walk through time made visible. The ground beneath your feet might once have been the floor of an ancient sea, then a river delta, then a desert, then frozen tundra. It's humbling, and it's strangely comforting too. Because if the mountains are still growing, still reshaping themselves, then perhaps so is the story of civilization. Maybe the question isn't whether the Himalayas hide the first civilizations, but whether civilization itself was born from the same restless energy that made these mountains, the urge to build, to rise, to adapt, to endure. The peaks may stand as monuments to the planet's power, but the valleys between them could hold the traces of humanity's earliest ambitions. In those quiet spaces, between stone and sky, the roof of the world might be more than a metaphor. It might be the literal shelter under which our oldest stories began to form. And as we look deeper into those valleys and the rivers that flow from them, the story continues, not with myth, but with the slow uncovering of what the mountains have kept safe for so long. Beneath the ice and stone there may be more than rock waiting to be found. There may be the echoes of the first people who ever called the earth home. Beneath the ice, the Himalayas are a world we can barely imagine. What we see on the surface, the white ridges, the shadowed valleys, the streams cutting through rock, is only a thin layer of what exists below. Ice has a way of preserving and concealing in equal measure. It hides not only the bones of the mountains themselves, but also the traces of everything that might have come before. When you stand on a glacier and listen closely, you can sometimes hear faint cracks and groans from deep inside it. The sound is slow and deliberate, like the mountain breathing through its teeth. That's where the oldest stories may rest, somewhere between the solid and the shifting. Scientists often describe glaciers as slow rivers of ice, flowing downhill over centuries. They scrape the surface beneath them, grinding rock into fine powder known as glacial flour. But they also entomb whatever lies in their path. Over time, snow becomes ice becomes pressure, and the past is sealed away in layers. Each layer, like a page in a book, traps air bubbles, dust, and sometimes remnants of life. When researchers drill deep cores from Himalayan glaciers, they're not just collecting ice, they're holding pieces of ancient atmosphere, traces of pollen from forests long vanished, soot from distant fires, and even microscopic fossils carried by winds from lands far away. Every centimetre of ice is a fragment of history that never reached the written page. What lies beneath those frozen archives is harder to say. The thickness of Himalayan glaciers varies wildly. In some valleys, the ice is over 600 metres deep. That's enough to bury entire cities, though of course none are known to exist there. Still, the scale of what remains hidden inspires both curiosity and caution. Beneath those glaciers lie buried valleys, ancient river channels, and sediments dating back millions of years. When the ice retreats, as it is doing more rapidly each decade, it exposes ground untouched by sunlight since before humanity existed. In some regions of Nepal and Tibet, newly exposed slopes have revealed fossilised forests, with tree trunks still standing upright, frozen in place by sudden landslides and ice thousands of years ago. Nearby, patches of dark soil appear, rich with organic matter, hinting that these frozen deserts were once green and alive. If forests once stood here, then perhaps humans or their ancestors walked among them. The challenge is that ice doesn't just preserve, it moves. Anything that might once have stood still, a settlement, a tool, a path, could have been carried away, distorted, or ground into fragments. The past is there, but it's scattered, mixed into the slow tide of the mountain's own memory. Archaeologists working in high-altitude regions speak of what they call the preservation paradox. Cold can protect ancient remains better than any vault, but it also hides them beyond reach. The same ice that kept them safe now keeps them sealed. It's a dilemma that stretches beyond the Himalayas, from the frozen tundra of Siberia to the glaciers of the Andes. But here it feels especially poignant. The Himalayas are not merely cold, they are colossal. Accessing what lies beneath means facing avalanches, shifting crevasses, and storms that can erase a camp in minutes. For that reason, much of what we know comes from the edges, the places where ice has retreated just enough to whisper clues. Those whispers are becoming louder. In the past 2 decades, as global temperatures have risen, glaciers across the Himalayas have begun to shrink. Some have lost more than a third of their mass. The meltwater flows into new rivers, carving channels that expose long-buried layers of sediment. Within these layers, scientists have found remnants of pollen, charcoal and animal bones. Charcoal is particularly intriguing. It suggests that fire once burned at high altitudes, fires that may have been natural, sparked by lightning, or intentional, built by people who lived where no one thought humans could. In one study, researchers examining soil from a glacier margin found carbon deposits dating back nearly 9,000 years. That would place human activity in the region long before the rise of the first known Himalayan kingdoms. It's possible that these early inhabitants weren't building cities or temples, but living as seasonal migrants, following herds, gathering roots, or seeking refuge from the plains below. Yet even that possibility reshapes the timeline. Civilizations don't appear overnight. They begin as patterns of survival, then grow into permanence. To imagine small bands of people moving through those valleys so long ago is to imagine the first threads in a story we've barely started to read. The evidence isn't just in the soil. High in the upper valleys of Ladakh and western Tibet, archaeologists have found rock shelters with faint markings, not elaborate paintings like those in European caves, but simple lines and shapes etched into the stone. Some depict animals, others abstract patterns, possibly maps or symbols. These carvings are difficult to date precisely, but many are thought to be more than 10,000 years old. They may represent communication, ritual, or simply an attempt to mark presence in a landscape too vast to comprehend. To look at them is to realise that even in these remote places, people felt the same urge to leave a trace of themselves behind. The discovery of such sites has renewed speculation about whether the Himalayas might once have hosted proto-civilizations, early, loosely organised societies that predate the great riverine cultures of Mesopotamia or the Indus. Some researchers believe that the constant climatic swings of the Ice Age pushed humans upward into mountain refuges, where glaciers created sheltered valleys rich in resources. When the climate warmed again, these groups may have moved downward, carrying knowledge and traditions that eventually influenced lowland societies. It's an idea still debated, but one that fits a broader pattern of human resilience. Wherever the Earth offered a challenge, people found a way to endure it. To test such ideas, scientists turned to what they call paleo-environmental reconstruction, studying layers of sediment, pollen and isotopes to rebuild a picture of the ancient climate. In the Himalayas, these records reveal cycles of warmth and cold stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. During warmer intervals, vegetation spread high into the valleys, creating habitable zones rich in game and fresh water. During colder phases, ice advanced, pushing life downward. It's possible that human presence in the region followed those same rhythms, appearing and vanishing like breath in winter air. As we uncover more of this history, it becomes clear that the line between natural and human is thin. Glacial ice, for instance, contains traces of dust and soot from ancient fires, particles that may have travelled hundreds of kilometres before settling. By analysing their composition, scientists can sometimes tell whether the fires were forest burns or caused by human activity. The results suggest that humans were altering the Himalayan environment long before recorded history. Not through cities or agriculture, but through smaller acts, clearing land, using fire to hunt, shaping ecosystems in subtle, cumulative ways. What we think of as wilderness might once have been home. Beneath the snow, there may be remnants of pathways, tools, or even bones, frozen into layers that have yet to thaw. When glaciers retreat, they sometimes release bodies astonishingly well preserved, travellers, monks, or climbers from centuries past. If those remains survive a few hundred years intact, it isn't impossible that older traces lie deeper still. The challenge is that we don't yet have the technology or the permission to dig beneath sacred ice. Many glaciers in the Himalayas are considered holy, and disturbing them is seen as a violation of the natural order. Science moves carefully here, balancing curiosity with respect. The notion of hidden civilizations beneath ice often drifts into the realm of legend. Tales of secret valleys, invisible cities, and subterranean kingdoms have circulated for centuries. While such stories can't be verified, they often contain grains of truth. Hidden valleys do exist, sealed by landslides or ice for generations. When they reopen, they reveal entire ecosystems cut off from the outside world. In one such valley in Arunachal Pradesh, scientists discovered plant species thought to have been extinct for millions of years. The area had been isolated by glacial walls until recent warming opened a narrow pass. If nature can preserve its creations for that long, why not humanity's smaller traces? Sometimes, the landscape itself seems to invite imagination. Massive boulders sit balanced on narrow pedestals of ice, looking like the foundations of lost monuments. Meltwater carves channels that resemble roads or walls. The mind connects shapes, seeking order in chaos. It's easy to see how myths could form here, how stories of buried kingdoms or sleeping gods might emerge from the very appearance of the terrain. Yet even if no great cities lie below, the real wonder is no less profound. Under every glacier, under every frozen ridge, lies the living archive of Earth's transformation, written in minerals and ice crystals instead of words. One of the most ambitious projects to study these deep archives is the Ice Memory Initiative, an international effort to collect and preserve ice cores from endangered glaciers. Teams have already drilled samples from the Alps and Andes, but the Himalayas pose both a challenge and a necessity. The region's glaciers are melting faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. If we lose them, we lose the record they hold. Those ice cores could reveal not only climate data, but also traces of ancient biological material, pollen, spores, bacteria, and perhaps, if we're lucky, signatures of human presence too faint for the naked eye to see. To the scientists involved, each core is a time capsule. When the drills bite through layers of ice, they cut across thousands of years in minutes. The samples are carefully sealed and stored in frozen archives, protected from contamination. Later, in laboratories, they're melted and analysed for chemical fingerprints. tiny variations in oxygen isotopes that reveal past temperatures, traces of volcanic ash marking distant eruptions, minute concentrations of metals that might indicate early smelting or trade. In these invisible details lies a portrait of how humans and their planet have evolved together. It's tempting to imagine what a full excavation beneath a glacier might reveal if technology and ethics ever allowed it. Perhaps ancient campsites preserved by sudden avalanches, or tools fashioned from bone and obsidian. Maybe nothing at all, just rocks, fossils, and silence. But the possibility itself holds value. It reminds us that history is deeper than we tend to think, and that the Earth keeps its own kind of memory, indifferent to ours but never entirely erased. Even without direct evidence of cities or monuments, the mountains hint at continuity. The people who live along their slopes today, Sherpa, Tamang, Bhutia, Ladakhi and many others, maintain oral traditions that speak of ancestors who came from hidden lands or rose from beneath the ice. Some of these stories describe great floods, others speak of times when the valleys were warm and green. Anthropologists studying these myths often find correlations with known climatic events, such as the sudden warming that ended the last ice age. Myth, in this sense, becomes a form of historical record, one that encodes geological memory into human language. When glaciers retreat, they sometimes reveal not only ancient land but also forgotten lakes. Beneath some of these lakes, sonar has detected what appear to be terraces, walls, or geometric shapes, though interpretation is cautious. Water distorts signals and the line between natural formation and human structure is thin. Still, the findings raise questions. Were these shapes once part of settlements later submerged by landslides or glacial floods? Or are they simply the result of ice sculpting rock in strangely familiar patterns? The mountains don't answer. They simply show, and we interpret. If there's one constant lesson from studying the Himalayas, it's that the line between myth and geology is porous. Both describe transformation. The mountains rise, stories grow, ice melts, memories resurface. Whether we call them civilizations or survival camps, the humans who once walked these frozen lands were part of the same process that built the peaks themselves. Adaptation through pressure, persistence through change. The rocks beneath the glaciers are full of fossils, but they're also full of possibility. Every thaw reveals something the world had forgotten to remember, and as we keep watching the mountains change, as new valleys open and old ones disappear beneath snow again, the idea of secrets beneath ice becomes less a fantasy and more a certainty. Not necessarily cities of gold or vanished empires, but something subtler, a record of humanity learning to live at the edge of the world, leaving traces in the most unlikely places. Those traces might one day tell us how far back our story really goes, how deeply intertwined it is with the shifting crust of the planet. The ice will keep moving, carrying those secrets with it, reshaping them, hiding them again. But every so often, it lets something slip. A fragment of bone, a buried tool, a layer of charcoal. A quiet reminder that beneath the ice and stone the past still stirs, and as it does, it leads us further down the valleys, toward the places where rivers once flowed freely, carving paths that may yet lead to the next chapter in this unfolding mystery. Long before the mountains rose to their current heights, the Himalayas were threaded with rivers that no longer exist. They ran through valleys now buried beneath stone and ice, carving paths across a landscape that has since folded upon itself. These vanished rivers were once the lifelines of ecosystems, carrying water, sediment and life from glaciers to plains that no longer look the same. If we could trace their courses today, we might find not only forgotten landscapes, but traces of the people who once followed their banks. In a sense, the story of any civilization is also the story of its rivers. When the rivers change, everything else does too. Scientists studying satellite imagery of the Himalayas and the surrounding regions often find ghostly outlines of what were once great channels. Some run parallel to existing rivers, Others diverge into dry basins that seem to lead nowhere. These aren't simple cracks in the ground. They're ancient riverbeds filled with sediment sealed under layers of younger rock. You can't see them from the ground, but from above, they appear like faint scars, reminders of a time when the entire region was shaped by water rather than ice. Among the most intriguing of these is the Saraswati, a river once celebrated in ancient Indian texts as mighty and sacred, flowing from the mountains into the sea. For centuries, scholars debated whether it was real or mythical. Then, satellite studies and geological surveys began revealing evidence of a massive, now extinct river system that might have matched the ancient descriptions. The river's course appears to have originated near the Himalayas, flowing southwest through what is now dry desert before disappearing beneath the sands of Rajasthan. Its channels are buried, but their outlines still whisper through the soil. If this river existed, and the evidence increasingly suggests it did, it might have been among the largest in the ancient world, rivaling the Indus and the Ganges. Along its banks, archaeologists have found settlements dating back over 5,000 years, perhaps older, with pottery, beads and tools similar to those found in the Indus Valley cities. The people who lived there would have relied on its waters for farming, trade and movement. When the river began to vanish, their world must have changed beyond recognition. Rivers don't disappear all at once. They fade slowly, withdrawing like breath. Climate shifts can change rainfall patterns. Tectonic uplift can alter their flow, and glaciers can retreat or advance, blocking or diverting channels. Over thousands of years, the river that once nourished thousands of lives becomes a memory. Yet its absence leaves marks. Fertile plains turn to dust, salt deposits where water once pooled, and myths that mourn what was lost. The story of the vanished rivers isn't just geological, it's emotional, cultural, and deeply human. When glaciers grow, they dam valleys and create lakes. When they melt, those lakes burst, sending torrents of water downstream. Entire river systems can shift overnight. In the Himalayas, where ice and rock live in constant negotiation, this process has played out countless times. The Sutlej, the Yamuna, even the Ganges have all changed courses over geological time. What we see today is just one chapter in a much longer story. Beneath the current rivers, older ones sleep, their channels filled with sediment, their waters gone but their shapes preserved. In some parts of northern India, ground-penetrating radar has revealed networks of buried channels spreading out like veins beneath the desert. They're dry now, but when tested, the sediments show signs of having carried fresh water thousands of years ago. Some even contain microscopic algae and shells, remnants of aquatic life. These aren't the fossils of ancient seas, they're traces of rivers that once ran where today there is only dust. It's strange to think that beneath the feet of villagers walking across arid land lie the beds of forgotten waterways, waiting silently beneath. What's remarkable is how closely this scientific picture aligns with stories passed down for millennia. Ancient texts speak of sacred rivers that flowed across the land and then disappeared into the earth. To modernize, such descriptions sound poetic, but they match geological reality more closely than anyone expected. It's as though the memory of those rivers survived in myth long after their physical traces faded. People might forget the details of an event, but not its feeling. A river that vanishes leaves behind a sense of loss, strong enough to echo through generations. Some scientists suggest that the drying of these ancient rivers may have played a role in the transformation of early societies. When the flow of water changed, so did trade routes, settlements, and patterns of agriculture. Populations shifted towards surviving rivers like the Indus, giving rise to the great urban centres we know from history. If so, then the lost rivers of the Himalayas aren't just curiosities. They're the missing chapters in the story of civilization itself. They connect the deep geological time of mountain formation with the human time of migration and adaptation. In recent decades, new technologies have allowed researchers to map these vanished waterways in astonishing detail. Using radar that penetrates through sand and sediment, scientists have traced the outlines of rivers buried beneath kilometres of earth. One study revealed a vast paleo-channel running parallel to the modern-day Gaga River, believed to be part of the ancient Saraswati system. The sediments along this buried channel are rich in minerals typical of glacial sources, meaning they once carried meltwater directly from the Himalayas. This wasn't a small local stream. It was a major artery linking the mountains to the sea. The implications are profound. If great rivers once flowed where deserts now stretch, then the climate and geography of the region must have been radically different. The Himalayas would have looked younger, less eroded, their glaciers more extensive, their valleys greener. Forests might have covered slopes now bare. Herds of animals would have moved along the riverbanks, and human groups drawn by water and shelter would have followed. Somewhere along those vanished courses, people may have built their first permanent homes, planted their first crops, or carved their first symbols into stone. In places like Ladakh and western Tibet, traces of ancient shorelines are visible high above current river levels, terraces cut into rock by long-vanished water. Standing on one of those terraces, you can almost see it. The wide flow of a river glinting in sunlight, its surface rippled by wind, carrying the reflections of mountains that hadn't yet reached their full height. These terraces are the ghosts of past climates. They show where rivers once ran when glaciers melted faster, when rainfall was heavier, when the planet was slightly warmer or cooler than it is now. Over time, as the Himalayas continue to rise, their weight pressed down the crust beneath the plains, changing the gradient of the land. Rivers that once flowed southward began to tilt east or west, finding new paths. Some merged, some split, some vanished entirely. The Earth's crust behaves slowly, but its consequences are enormous. A slight shift in elevation can redirect a river across hundreds of kilometres. When that happens, everything that depends on it, forests, animals, humans, must adapt or move. The vanished rivers remind us that nothing in nature is fixed, not even the ground beneath us. Occasionally, these ancient channels reveal themselves through other means. During heavy monsoons, certain dry basins fill with water, for the first time in centuries, tracing the old paths for a few fleeting days before drying again. Locals sometimes call them ghost rivers. To see one appear after a storm is both beautiful and unsettling. Water flowing where maps say none should exist, as if the land is remembering itself. It's a glimpse of the past breaking through the surface, a reminder that landscapes have memories even when we don't. The human connection to these hidden waterways goes beyond survival. Rivers were not just sources of water, they were sources of meaning. In nearly every culture that arose near the Himalayas, rivers are revered as living entities, mothers, goddesses, or paths between worlds. When they dried, their absence became sacred too, a symbol of loss and renewal. The Saraswati, even in disappearance, remains one of the holiest names in Indian tradition, representing knowledge and flow. In that sense, the river didn't die. It transformed from geography into philosophy, from water into memory. There's also a practical side to studying vanished rivers. Understanding their courses helps us predict where ancient settlements might be buried. Archaeologists use these paleo-channels as guides, searching along their edges for signs of habitation, pottery fragments, hearths, or tools, and more often than not they find them. It seems early humans knew instinctively where to settle. Even when rivers change course, their dry beds continue to offer fertile soil and groundwater close to the surface. The people followed the ghosts of rivers just as we follow them now. In the broader picture of planetary history, the vanishing of rivers is part of a cycle that never really ends. Ice melts, rivers form, climates shift, water finds new paths. What feels like destruction is often just transition. The Himalayas have seen countless versions of themselves. Warm valleys that became glaciers, frozen deserts that once teemed with life. The rivers we see now, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Indus, are simply the latest forms of an ancient network that has been weaving through this region for millions of years. The ones that vanished haven't been erased. They've only changed shape. But while the planet accepts such transformations as natural, human memory resists. We long for continuity. We name things eternal. We call rivers holy, mountains everlasting, civilizations permanent. The earth quietly reminds us otherwise. Beneath every fertile plain is an old riverbed. Beneath every city lies another city's dust. The Himalayas, with all their grandeur, are built on a foundation of forgotten waterways. Their peaks rise because their rivers fell. When geologists sample sediments from these ancient channels, they find layered histories of drought and flood. Each stratum tells of different conditions: grains of sand deposited by fast-moving torrents, followed by silt from gentle flows, then layers of dust from times of dryness. Reading those layers is like reading a diary kept by the earth itself. The handwriting changes with time, but the story remains the same. Water comes, water goes, life follows. The idea that some of humanity's earlier civilizations may have thrived along these now lost rivers changes how we think about our beginnings. We often picture civilization as starting in fertile plains, where conditions were stable and predictable. But perhaps it began in places less certain, regions shaped by shifting rivers and unpredictable climates. People there would have learned flexibility, innovation, and resilience. They would have had to read the signs of the earth closely to understand when to move, when to plant, when to rebuild. Maybe civilization didn't emerge from stability but from adaptation. And that brings us back to the Himalayas themselves. The mountains don't stand apart from human history, they're woven into it. Their growth redirected rivers, and those rivers in turn redirected people. The vanished rivers of the Himalayas aren't just geological curiosities, they're the fingerprints of change. Each one marks a turning point, a flood that erased, a drought that scattered, a new flow that gave rise to something different. Even the great cities of the Indus Valley owe their existence, in part, to the shifts that began higher up among these peaks. When you think about it, the mountains are less a wall and more a hinge, moving pieces of earth and humanity alike. What they hide beneath their snow and stone may not be lost cities in the sense of legend, but lost pathways, the channels that once connected us to our earliest selves. Every grain of silt carried down from those vanished rivers is a fragment of that connection, still moving, still part of the cycle. If we could walk the dry beds of those forgotten streams, we might find more than artifacts. We might find a reminder of how fluid civilization really is. The rivers we depend on today are temporary, just as theirs were. Someday they too will change course, and new ones will rise where we cannot imagine them now. The Earth's story is never finished. It keeps erasing and rewriting, using water as its pen. The Himalayas, for all their immensity, are participants in that story, not its conclusion. The vanished rivers beneath them are the echoes of movement, the quiet proof that nothing truly stands still. They guide us toward a deeper understanding that beneath every glacier, beneath every mountain, beneath every civilization, there runs a current we can't see but can always feel. And as we follow it, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at the next beginning, where the land itself seems to whisper that there are more secrets still waiting to surface, somewhere beyond the reach of ice and stone. Stories rise where rivers vanish. When the landscape changes faster than memory can adjust, people turn to myth to make sense of what they've lost. In the shadow of the Himalayas, where valleys collapse and rivers shift, stories are not luxuries, they're anchors. They hold on to something the earth has already moved. Every culture that has lived near these mountains has looked up at their white faces and felt the same impulse: to explain, to remember, to belong. The result is a web of myths so old that no one can say where they began, only that they persist, like the snow that never quite melts from the highest peaks. At the edge of Tibet, near places where even the wind seems reluctant to linger, there are stories of hidden kingdoms tucked behind walls of ice. The most famous of these is Shambhala. a realm described as both real and symbolic, a paradise of wisdom said to appear only to those pure enough to see it. In some versions, it lies deep within the mountains, concealed by snow, and guarded by beings who have mastered both spirit and science. In others, it's not a place at all, but a state of awareness, reached through understanding rather than travel. And yet, even among those who speak of it metaphorically, there's always a faint hesitation, the sense that maybe, somewhere, there was once something tangible behind the legend. These myths are not isolated. Across the Himalayan arc from Bhutan to Kashmir, tales of hidden valleys and lost civilizations are common. They speak of sanctuaries untouched by time, of caves that open once every century to reveal entire worlds of light and learning. Some say these are remnants of earlier ages, when gods and humans lived side by side. Others describe them as refuges, places built to preserve knowledge from catastrophe, whether flood, fire, or ice. When you listen closely, the pattern repeats. The world ends, the mountains rise, and somewhere a few survive, carrying the seed of what came before. It's easy to dismiss such stories as imagination, yet they often align uncannily with natural patterns. Glaciers advance and retreat, sealing valleys for centuries, then releasing them. Earthquakes open fissures that later become hidden caves. Landslides bury villages and temples whole, preserving them beneath layers of rock until they reappear in some distant future. In that light, a myth about a hidden kingdom isn't just fantasy, it's memory interpreted through awe. The land itself behaves in mythic ways. It swallows and reveals, it hides and returns. When early explorers and scholars first heard Tibetan monks speak of Shambhala, they often assumed it referred to a lost city like Atlantis, an earthly paradise waiting to be rediscovered. Expeditions were organised, maps drawn, theories spun. Some claimed to find traces of its existence in remote valleys or ruined monasteries. Others declared it a metaphor for inner peace. What none of them grasped was that the myth didn't need to be proven to be true. It was already serving its purpose. It offered meaning in a place where the ground was too vast, too indifferent, to provide reassurance on its own. In Buddhist cosmology, Shambhala is said to be ruled by enlightened kings who will one day return to guide humanity when ignorance overwhelms the world. The story isn't about geography so much as renewal. The belief that wisdom, like a river, never truly disappears, only goes underground for a while. It's a comforting symmetry, especially in a land where real rivers have vanished beneath the earth. People look to the mountains not just for protection, but for the promise that nothing sacred is ever lost forever. Further west in Hindu traditions, there are stories of Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain that stands at the centre of all creation. It's said to connect heaven, earth, and the underworld, its peak touching the realm of the gods. Some interpretations place it in the Himalayas, seeing these peaks as reflections or echoes of the true Meru. In ancient Sanskrit texts, the Himalayas are described as the abode of Shiva, the ascetic who dances the universe into being and destruction. His home, Mount Kailash, is revered as the earthly axis of the cosmos. No one is permitted to climb it. Even modern mountaineers capable of reaching Everest turn back out of respect. The mountain remains untouched, perfectly symmetrical, its slopes falling like folded fabric around an invisible centre. Pilgrims from across Asia travel hundreds of kilometres to circle its base. The path takes several days, winding through thin air and loose stone, yet those who complete it say they feel lighter, quieter, as if the mountain's gravity is both physical and spiritual. There's a shared sense that Kailash isn't merely rock and snow, but something older, a living structure from a time before time. The myths surrounding it describe it as indestructible, unchanging, the one point that remains when all else transforms. It's tempting to see in this an ancient intuition about geology, that beneath the chaos of earthquakes and erosion, there's a steady core, a rhythm deeper than time. Myths from the Himalayan regions often blur the line between divine and natural. Lakes are said to be eyes of gods, glaciers the robes of deities, thunder the echo of celestial drums. Each element of the landscape carries a story, often one that reflects an observation about the world. For instance, there are legends of mountains that bleed red when wounded, inspired by iron-rich soils that stain water crimson after rainfall. There are stories of sleeping stones that wake and move, based on boulders dislodged by thawing ice. These myths aren't errors in understanding. They're early forms of science expressed through wonder. When direct measurement isn't possible, imagination fills the gap, but it does so with care, shaped by centuries of watching the land closely. The high-altitude people of the Himalayas live in a constant dialogue with their surroundings. For them, mountains aren't obstacles to be conquered, but beings to be respected. When avalanches roar down a slope, they say the mountain has spoken. When a glacier cracks, it's the sound of shifting moods. These beliefs don't separate the physical from the spiritual. They merge them. And in that merging, something profound emerges. A recognition that human life and geological life are part of the same story, moving at different speeds but under the same laws. Archaeologists studying oral traditions in Himalayan villages have noticed that some myths preserve surprising accuracy about natural events. One story from northern Nepal describes a great white flood that descended from the mountains long ago, destroying entire valleys. The details match what scientists now understand as a glacial lake outburst flood, a phenomenon where a natural dam of ice gives way. Releasing a wall of water downstream, the village's ancestors couldn't have known the mechanics of it, but they knew what they saw. Over generations, the event became myth, the myth became ritual, and the ritual became part of their understanding of safety and respect for the mountains. It's not hard to imagine how a people living in such proximity to shifting glaciers would learn to encode warnings in story form. A tale about angry gods punishing those who build too high on a slope may simply be advice not to settle beneath an unstable moraine. A legend about hidden valleys that appear only to the pure-hearted could be a metaphor for the rare, brief openings in the ice that reveal safe passage routes. What begins as survival becomes spirituality, and spirituality over time becomes heritage. There are also myths that reach beyond the mountains, linking the Himalayas to faraway lands. Tibetan texts speak of travellers who followed secret tunnels through the peaks to reach other worlds, sometimes underground, sometimes across time. While the literal image of tunnels may seem fanciful, modern geology has shown that extensive networks of lava tubes and caves do exist in parts of the region, carved by ancient volcanic activity. Some are large enough to walk through. If people once used them as refuges during harsh winters or conflicts, the stories could easily have grown into tales of passage between realms. In every culture, the unknown takes on spiritual shape. For those living among the Himalayas, the unknown is not a distant mystery but a constant presence. The peaks are too high to climb, the weather too volatile to predict, the valleys too deep to explore fully. The unseen is always close, and myth becomes a way to live with it, to speak to it without demanding it reveal itself. The result is a worldview where nothing is merely empty space. Every shadow holds a name, every echo has a source. The snow line, that shifting boundary between ice and earth, becomes, in these stories, the border between worlds. Below it, life continues as usual. Fields, villages, smoke rising from small fires. Above it, the rules change. Spirits dwell there, guardians, ancestors, sometimes even whole cities made of light. The snow line moves with the seasons, retreating in summer, advancing in winter, as if the barrier between visible and invisible is breathing. And perhaps that's what myth really is. The breath between what we know and what we feel. When modern scientists study the same regions, they sometimes find traces that make the old stories harder to dismiss. In caves near the upper reaches of Bhutan, explorers have found paintings and artifacts far older than the monasteries that now watch over them. The pigments used contain minerals not native to the area, suggesting trade or travel across long distances long before organised routes existed. To the locals, such discoveries aren't surprising. They've always said the caves were ancient, that they were once gateways to another time. For them, the new data is simply the mountain confirming what it's been saying all along. In a similar way, the myth of hidden kingdoms mirrors the reality of lost valleys buried under glacial debris. When scientists use radar to scan beneath ice, they find hollows, tunnels, and enclosed basins, some large enough to host entire ecosystems. Many of these remain unreachable, but they do exist. It's not impossible that during warmer periods in the past such valleys were habitable. People could have lived there, their traces later sealed away by advancing ice. If those stories survived, told, and retold, they would sound exactly like the myths we have today, of cities hidden, of doors that close for centuries, of knowledge preserved beneath the snow. Myth, in that sense, might be less invention and more memory seen through fog. It carries fragments of real places and events refracted by time. When we study myths alongside geology, patterns emerge. Floods where floods occurred, fires where volcanic activity is known, migrations where climatic shifts forced movement. The Himalayas are full of such alignments. They show that storytelling is another kind of record-keeping, one that doesn't rely on writing but on repetition and reverence. To sit by a fire in a mountain village and listen to these tales is to feel how seamlessly they weave science, history and belief. A story might begin with a spirit in a glacier and end with a lesson about planting crops before the meltwater arrives. Another might describe a mountain god's anger, only to reveal that it's really about the dangers of cutting too many trees on a slope. They're not superstitions, they're systems of understanding, translated into human terms. When knowledge is carried by word of mouth across generations, it must be memorable, and myth achieves that. What's most striking is that despite their differences, nearly all Himalayan myths share a tone of humility. The mountains are never conquered, never truly possessed. Even the gods in these stories tread carefully. Power belongs to the land, not to those who pass across it. That humility feels rare in our modern relationship with nature. We tend to view the world as something to master, measure, or extract from. The Himalayan worldview, shaped by centuries of living at the mercy of weather and altitude, offers another perspective, one that sees survival not as domination, but as cooperation. As the glaciers recede and new ground emerges, old stories are taking on new meanings. When a previously buried valley reappears, locals often treat it as a revelation, not because they expect to find treasure, but because they see it as the Earth's way of speaking. Scientists might describe the same event in terms of melt rates and sediment flow, but the experience is shared. Both groups are watching the same process, the planet revealing something it once hid. Myth gives that revelation a language the heart can understand. The snow line continues to shift just as it always has. What lies above it remains uncertain. Some say there are still places where the air feels strange, where compasses falter, where sound seems to stop. Perhaps these are just effects of altitude and magnetism, but in the moment they feel like thresholds. Standing there, it's easy to understand why myths persist, not because people need fantasy, but because the world still has corners that feel unfinished, half-seen, waiting. Somewhere high above the tree line, the wind scrapes across the rock like a whisper. The same sound that inspired legends thousands of years ago still moves through those valleys tonight. It carries snow, dust, and the faint murmur of stories older than any nation. Myths from the snow line are not just remnants of the past. They're the mountain's ongoing conversation with humanity. And as the snow melts and new valleys appear, it feels less like an ending than a continuation. The mountains telling us in their own way that the story isn't finished, that beneath the next drift there may be another truth waiting to be heard, one we haven't yet learned to name. The people who live in the high valleys of the Himalayas are not visitors. They are part of the landscape itself, shaped by the same forces that form the mountains. Long before there were borders, or even names for these places, small communities learned to exist in the thin air, among glaciers, stones and rivers that change direction with the seasons. Their lives are written not in books or monuments, but in adaptations, in lungs that hold more oxygen, in skin that resists cold, in hearts that beat just a little faster to keep the body alive where the world begins to thin out. When you first step into one of these valleys, you notice how silence carries here. It isn't empty silence, it's layered. Wind moves through prayer flags strung across rooftops. Yaks call from distant slopes. Streams murmur somewhere unseen beneath the ice. The people who live here don't fill that quiet. They share it. It's as much a part of their world as the air they breathe. They have built their lives around rhythm rather than control. The rhythm of melting snow, of herds migrating, of seasons that arrive with the slow certainty of tides. Anthropologists sometimes describe these communities as high-altitude specialists. But that phrase feels too clinical for what they are. They're not adapting to survive the mountains. They belong to them. The Sherpa of Nepal, the Ladakhi of northern India, the Dolpo of western Nepal, the Monpa of Bhutan, and the countless smaller groups scattered across hidden valleys all share a relationship with the land that's older than the written word. Each group has its own language, its own rituals, its own stories, yet all carry traces of a common origin, the long, quiet human effort to find balance at the edge of the habitable world. Genetic studies of Himalayan populations reveal something extraordinary. Over thousands of years, their bodies have evolved unique physiological traits that allow them to thrive where oxygen levels drop to half of what they are at sea level. It isn't just endurance training or lifestyle, it's biology. Certain genes, like the EPAS1 variant found among Tibetans, help their blood carry oxygen more efficiently without thickening, which would otherwise strain the heart. This adaptation likely arose from interbreeding with an ancient human relative, the Denisovans, whose genetic traces still linger in people living in these regions. In a sense, the Himalayas are one of the few places on Earth where multiple branches of the human family have converged and remained visible in our DNA. That connection between ancient and modern humans isn't theoretical. Fossil evidence from caves on the Tibetan plateau suggests that Denisovans lived there over 160,000 years ago. That's long before Homo sapiens reached the region. To survive at such altitude, they must have already possessed the same genetic adaptations we see in their descendants today. When our species eventually migrated into the mountains, we inherited that resilience, a gift from another branch of humanity that had learned the secret of thin air. It's an extraordinary continuity. The same wind that blows through these valleys tonight has brushed against the faces of humans for more than 100 millennia. But genetics tell only one part of the story. The rest lives in the way people here move through the world. Villages cling to terraces carved from rock, surrounded by fields of barley, buckwheat and potatoes. Every flat surface is used, every drop of meltwater diverted through intricate channels to feed the crops. The altitude makes growing anything difficult, yet the ingenuity of these systems keeps communities fed through long winters. Yaks and sheep provide milk, wool, and labour. Their presence is as vital as fire. Even now, in places where no road reaches, caravans of yaks still carry salt, butter, and grain between valleys, following routes older than empires. For the people of the high Himalayas, the boundary between work and ritual is blurred. Every act of sustenance, planting, herding, gathering wood, is accompanied by quiet gestures of reverence. Before cutting a tree, they might offer a prayer. Before crossing a pass, they leave a small stone or thread as an offering to the spirits said to dwell there. To outsiders, these may seem like customs, but here they are survival strategies woven into culture. When nature is unpredictable, respect becomes another form of caution. The spiritual and the practical merge. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans first began settling in these valleys permanently around 10,000 years ago. soon after the last ice age ended. The retreat of glaciers opened new land, and the warming climate made it possible to cultivate crops at higher altitudes. In caves and rock shelters, traces of ancient habitation still linger. Hearths blackened with soot, fragments of tools, bones from hunted animals. In one site in Mustang, central Nepal, researchers found remains of complex burial chambers carved directly into cliff faces, filled with pottery, jewellery and animal offerings. The practice suggests not just survival, but society. Communities with shared beliefs about life, death and continuity. What's fascinating about these early mountain societies is how isolated yet connected they were. Isolation gave them stability. Connection gave them resilience. The high passes that separate valleys are treacherous, but they've also served as trade routes for thousands of years. Salt from the Tibetan plateau, grains from the Indian plains, turquoise, coral and wool all moved along narrow trails cut into the sides of cliffs. This exchange shaped more than just economies. It carried ideas, languages and technologies. A traveller walking through the Himalayas even 1,000 years ago would have heard a dozen dialects in a single week, each shaped by both geography and contact. Today, when you visit a village like Kumjung or Tabo, you can still see traces of this layered history. Stone houses built generations ago stand beside prayer walls covered in carved mantras. Some of those walls contain stones far older than the structures themselves, likely taken from ruins or sacred sites that predate current settlements. It's a quiet form of recycling, not out of neglect, but reverence. The old stones are carried forward, ensuring the past remains part of the present. In that way, each village is not just a community, but a living archive, built from fragments of those who came before. The mountains themselves dictate the rhythm of life here. There is no strict boundary between summer and winter, only transitions marked by migration. When the snows recede, families move livestock to higher pastures. When the cold returns, they descend. Children learn these cycles the way others learn calendars. The migration routes are memorized, not written. Paths are marked by piles of stones, called cairns, that stand as both guideposts and offerings. Each one is a quiet conversation between humans and the land, a promise to pass safely and to return. Over centuries, these communities developed a unique relationship with altitude that goes beyond physical endurance. There's a calm acceptance of impermanence here, a recognition that nothing holds its form for long. Houses are built from stone and mud because they can be rebuilt easily after an earthquake. Roofs are weighted with rocks to resist the wind, but if the wind wins, repairs begin without complaint. In a landscape where entire slopes can vanish overnight, permanence is an illusion. Instead, people invest in what endures: relationships, rituals, and the memory of place. Linguists who study the Himalayan region describe it as one of the world's most complex linguistic mosaics. Dozens of languages, often mutually unintelligible, coexist within small distances. This diversity hints at deep human roots. Languages evolve fastest in places of long-term habitation and relative isolation. That pattern suggests that people have been living continuously in these valleys for far longer than written records imply. Each tongue preserves traces of ancient migrations, blending words from Sanskrit, Tibetan, and even older, unidentified sources. Some words for local plants or animals have no known cognates anywhere else, remnants of vanished languages that survive only in these isolated pockets. If you listen to elders telling stories in these villages, you'll notice how seamlessly myth and memory intertwine. A tale might begin with a family migrating from one valley to another, but end with a spirit guiding them through a snowstorm. The lines between fact and faith are soft, not because people are careless with truth, but because truth here has always included the unseen. When you live surrounded by mountains that can erase roads overnight, you learn to see mystery not as an exception, but as part of reality. The Himalayan people's spiritual traditions reflect that intimacy with uncertainty. In Buddhism, which spread widely through the region, Impermanence is not feared, but understood as the nature of all things. In older animistic traditions, every element of the environment is alive, deserving respect. Offerings are made to rocks, rivers and sky as gestures of gratitude and caution. A sudden landslide is not a punishment, but a reminder that balance has shifted. The rituals are not about controlling nature, they're about staying in conversation with it. And yet, despite their remoteness, these communities have never been static. For thousands of years, they've absorbed influences from beyond the mountains, travellers from Central Asia, merchants from the plains, monks carrying scriptures from far to the west. The result is a cultural ecosystem as layered as the rock itself. A single monastery might contain murals painted in styles borrowed from India, texts copied in Tibetan, and architectural details reminiscent of Persia. Nothing here exists in isolation. The mountains that seem to divide actually connect. Modern research in archaeology and anthropology increasingly supports the idea that the high Himalayas were not just peripheral zones, but active participants in the development of civilization. Ancient trade routes through these passes may have been among the earliest arteries linking South and Central Asia. Goods moved along them, but so did ideas, farming techniques, metallurgy, language. Some scholars even suggest that early experiments with agriculture could have begun in the mountain foothills, where seasonal snowmelt provided reliable irrigation before spreading to the plains. If that's true, then the people of the high valleys weren't living at the margins of history, they were shaping it. To this day, the resilience of Himalayan communities is quietly astonishing. Life at such altitudes demands a kind of calm endurance. The thin air forces slower movement, deliberate pacing. Tasks that would take an hour elsewhere can take half a day here. But slowness isn't seen as inefficiency, it's part of balance. The mountain decides the tempo and people adjust. When storms close the passes, work shifts indoors. Weaving, storytelling, mending tools. When the weather clears, the entire village seems to exhale at once, and paths fill with people again, carrying wood, grain, or offerings to shrines. These rhythms of daily life have persisted for centuries, even as the outside world has accelerated. Yet they are not static traditions preserved out of resistance. They continue because they work. The same methods that sustained ancestors still feed families today. The same respect for the land that once kept avalanches at bay continues to guide decisions about where to build or how to travel. The knowledge is practical, but it carries something else. A quiet philosophy that sees no separation between human and mountain, between survival and reverence. In recent years, scientists studying climate change in the Himalayas have begun collaborating with local communities to document traditional ecological knowledge, a phrase that feels sterile compared to what it describes. It's the accumulated wisdom of generations who have read the mountains like a text, the colour of the sky that predicts a storm, the pattern of snowmelt that warns of a flood, the call of certain birds that signals a shift in season. These observations are being confirmed by data, but they existed long before satellites or sensors. They remind us that science and tradition are not opposites. They are different languages describing the same landscape. As glaciers retreat and seasons shift unpredictably, these communities are facing changes faster than any generation before them. Rivers once steady are now erratic. Landslides cut off roads for months. Some villages have already relocated to safer ground. Yet even as the world below debates the causes, the people here approach it with the same quiet resilience that has carried them through countless cycles of ice and thaw. They adapt, they rebuild, they plant again. For them, survival has always been about movement, not defiance. There's a phrase in one of the Himalayan dialects that loosely translates to "the mountain and I breathe together." It captures something essential about how these people live. The mountain gives and takes. They respond in kind. It isn't submission or domination. It's coexistence, a recognition that they are temporary guests in a place that will outlast them, and that their best chance of enduring is to live lightly, leaving room for the mountain's moods. When you think about how long humans have lived here, how many generations have walked these same narrow trails, it becomes difficult to see the Himalayas as purely wilderness. They are peopled landscapes, deeply known and continuously interpreted. Each valley has its own personality, its own customs, its own smaller miracles of adaptation. Together, they form a mosaic of human history as vast and intricate as the mountains themselves. And somewhere within that mosaic, perhaps buried in the oldest layers, may lie the first real hints of civilization, not in the form of cities or monuments, but in the shape of cooperation, shared belief, and the mastery of living with change. The people of the high valleys are the quiet proof that humanity doesn't always begin in abundance. Sometimes it begins in thin air, where breath itself is an achievement, and where the earth teaches, slowly and without words, how to endure. Every step in the Himalayas is a step across time. The ground itself is layered with history so old that the word ancient begins to lose meaning. Beneath the grass, beneath the soil, beneath even the glaciers that look eternal, lie stones that remember everything. They've been part of oceans, deserts, forests, and fire. They've carried the weight of ice and the warmth of sunlight filtered through water. They've risen, crumbled, and risen again. When you pick up a small rock on a Himalayan trail, you're holding something that has seen the earth remade more than once. It's impossible not to wonder what stories such stones might tell, if we knew how to listen. The Himalayas are young compared to the earth itself, but the materials that make them are among the oldest anywhere. The rocks that now sit at the highest peaks once lay at the bottom of an ancient sea. They were sediments, sand, clay, shells, slowly compressed under the weight of water and time. When the Indian plate collided with Asia, those seabeds were thrust upward, folded, and twisted until they became mountains. Fossils of marine creatures still rest near the summits of the tallest peaks, small spirals and fragments of coral embedded in limestone. They're tiny, fragile proofs of how the world transforms itself. You can stand above the clouds and hold in your hand a piece of what was once an ocean floor. Every layer of stone tells part of that transformation. The deeper you go, the further back in time you travel. At the base of the range are ancient metamorphic rocks, some dating back more than 1 billion years. Above them lie younger sedimentary layers, shaped by the pressure of mountain building and erosion. Together they form a geological record more complete than any library, though far harder to read. To interpret it, scientists look for signs of heat, pressure, and mineral change. The marks of events that happened long before life took hold. Each shift in colour or texture marks an epoch, a volcanic eruption, a shift in the planet's orbit, a surge of ice. The mountains are not static. They are archives written in mineral language. What fascinates geologists most is how quickly this archive changes. In most places on Earth, erosion slowly wears down mountains over tens of millions of years. In the Himalayas, the process is faster. The same collision that built them still continues, pushing them upward even as rivers and weather tear them apart. This balance of rising and wearing down means that new rock is constantly exposed, revealing fresh pages from deep time. Landslides, earthquakes, and glacial retreat are destructive to human eyes, but to science they are acts of revelation. The mountains show us more of themselves with every fracture. Sometimes these newly exposed layers reveal something unexpected, marks not made by geology, but by human hands. In remote valleys of northern Nepal, high on cliffs where few people go, researchers have found petroglyphs etched into the stone. Some are simple geometric forms, others depict animals, deer, ibex, yak, and figures that might represent hunters. The carvings are shallow, weathered, and often difficult to see without the right light. But once your eyes adjust, they emerge like ghosts. It's clear that whoever made them was telling stories long before writing existed. Dating these carvings is difficult, but many appear to be thousands of years old, perhaps among the earliest human marks in the region. Some sit near ancient trade routes, others overlook rivers that have long since shifted course. The patterns vary, but they share a certain rhythm, as if the people who carved them were responding to something larger than themselves. The same cycles of migration, the same migrations of animals, the same need to make memory visible. These stones were not just canvases, they were witnesses. There's something profound about carving into rock in a place like the Himalayas. It's not just about leaving a mark, it's about conversing with permanence in a landscape where everything else changes, rivers vanish, glaciers move, valleys collapse. The stone endures. To carve into it is to speak across time. It's a statement of presence that can outlast generations, even civilizations. When we find those ancient lines today, we are not simply uncovering art. We're hearing voices that refuse to be erased. In some regions, carvings have been found alongside natural formations that seem to invite attention. Smooth boulders shaped by wind and ice, cliffs that face the morning sun, stones that ring softly when struck. These were likely chosen for their resonance, both literal and symbolic. In many Himalayan cultures, stone is not dead material but living matter. It breathes slowly, it holds energy, it remembers. The same belief appears in countless traditions across Asia. Sacred stones mark the entrances to villages, crossroads, and passes. They are places where the seen and unseen overlap. To touch them is to ask permission, to acknowledge that the land itself is listening. Even today, when new roads cut through the mountains, it's common for workers to pause before moving a large boulder. They'll decorate it with coloured powder or hang prayer flags around it, offering a gesture of respect before continuing. Is not superstition so much as etiquette, an understanding that the stone was here long before us and will remain long after. The continuity of that respect is remarkable. It stretches back to the earliest carvings, to the first people who realised that the mountain was both shelter and story. In certain valleys, archaeologists have discovered what appear to be ancient cairns and megalithic structures, piles of stone arranged in deliberate patterns. Some mark burial sites, others boundaries or ceremonial grounds. Their exact purpose remains uncertain, but their placement often aligns with astronomical features, sunrise points, solstice angles, or the paths of particular stars. It suggests that even in these remote regions, people were tracking celestial cycles thousands of years ago. They were measuring time through stone. When we imagine ancient civilizations, we often picture grand architecture, temples, pyramids, walled cities. But in the Himalayas, permanence takes different forms. A line carved into rock, a stack of stones aligned with the horizon, a mark placed beside a glacier. These are monuments too, built for endurance rather than display. They may not look like cities, but they embody the same impulse, to understand the world and to leave a trace within it. Civilization doesn't begin with brick and mortar. It begins with the decision to mark a moment and to pass that mark forward. The mountains themselves help preserve these traces. The dry air, cold temperatures, and inaccessibility protect ancient sites from decay and looting. In caves scattered throughout Tibet and Ladakh, murals painted centuries ago still retain their colour, shielded from sunlight. Some depict Buddhist deities, others scenes from daily life, herding, weaving, travel. Yet beneath these visible layers, scientists using new imaging techniques have discovered older paintings hidden under later work. These faint images could date back to pre-Buddhist times, perhaps even to early shamanic traditions. It's as if each generation added its own voice to the same stone, layering meaning upon meaning. The more researchers study these sites, the clearer it becomes that the Himalayas have been a cultural corridor for far longer than anyone suspected. The petroglyphs, cairns and paintings form a network stretching thousands of kilometres, from the Indus Valley in the west to the high passes of Bhutan in the east. They reveal trade, migration, and shared belief across enormous distances. In places, Identical symbols appear hundreds of miles apart, carved by people who could never have met. The repetition suggests not coincidence but connection, perhaps an early form of communication or a shared system of meaning spread by travellers moving between valleys. Geologists, too, find themselves reading the stones for clues not only about the planet but about us. By analysing isotopes and mineral composition, they can determine where a rock originated and how far it's travelled. Sometimes the stones used in ancient structures come from distant sources, implying trade or pilgrimage. In one Himalayan monastery, the foundation stones were found to contain marine fossils not native to that valley. They must have been carried from elsewhere, perhaps deliberately, as a symbolic gesture. The ocean brought to the mountains, the ancient to the eternal. Every stone in the Himalayas holds layers of contrast like that. To the eye, they seem immovable, yet they move, carried by glaciers, rivers, landslides. To the hand, they feel solid, yet they erode with a single touch of water over time. To the mind, they represent permanence, yet they exist only through change. The people who've lived among them for millennia understand this instinctively. That's why stones are so often used in their rituals, stacked in stupas, spun into prayer wheels, carved with mantras. The mountain gives the stone. The people return it transformed, covered in words or prayers that will slowly fade back into the earth. It's an endless dialogue between endurance and impermanence. The act of carving into rock also creates a sense of continuity between human time and geological time. When a person etches a line into a cliff face, they become part of a timeline far longer than their own life. The mark might outlast nations, languages, even species. It's an expression of faith in persistence. That meaning can endure even as everything else erodes. The Himalayas, with their immense patience, invite that kind of thinking. They teach by scale, by duration. Every crack, every fossil, every mineral vein is a reminder that time is not linear but layered, and that we exist within those layers, not outside them. Some scientists have begun to argue that the Himalayas themselves could be considered a kind of natural monument, not in the poetic sense, but in the literal one. They contain a record of the Earth's climatic and biological history unlike anywhere else. Within their stones lie traces of atmospheric changes, volcanic eruptions, and even the magnetic field reversals that have occurred over billions of years. To study a single rock here is to glimpse a piece of planetary autobiography. When combined with human artifacts, the result is astonishing. Geology and culture interwoven, each shaping the other. There are moments, even for scientists, when the line between study and reverence blurs. Imagine standing at dawn near a cliff where carvings thousands of years old glow faintly in the rising light. The air is cold enough to make every breath visible. The stone under your hand feels both rough and impossibly smooth, polished by time. You realise that someone else once stood here, holding a tool, thinking their own thoughts about permanence and loss. The distance between them and you collapses for a moment. The mountains don't bridge that gap. The stone does. To those who live here, the mountain stones are more than matter. They're companions. Children play among cairns that have stood for centuries. Elders gather near stone walls to share stories, leaning against the same surfaces that their ancestors once touched. When earthquakes strike, they rebuild with the same rocks, slotting them back together as though reassembling memory itself. The stones return to their places and life continues. Each rebuilding is both repetition and renewal, an acknowledgement that nothing truly ends here. It only changes form. In many villages, the sound of prayer wheels turning fills the air. Wooden drums packed with scrolls of sacred text, spun endlessly by the wind or by passing hands. The wheels are often built into stone walls or placed beside paths, their bases worn smooth by generations of touch. Every rotation is a prayer released, every breath of wind a continuation of faith. The stone foundation that supports them bears quiet witness. Over time, its surface darkens with oil from hands and yak butter lamps. If you run your fingers along it, You can feel the warmth of centuries stored in the rock, as if time itself has a temperature. When archaeologists document these sites, they often describe the process as listening. They read the stones not just for inscriptions, but for context. The placement, the wear, the way sunlight strikes at different hours. Sometimes the absence of marks tells as much as their presence. A smooth boulder left untouched beside a cluster of carvings might signify reverence, a stone too sacred to alter. Every detail contributes to the story, one that spans millennia yet remains coherent through the shared human urge to leave a trace. If we imagine civilization as a conversation between people and their environment, then in the Himalayas that conversation takes place through stone. The mountains speak slowly, through tectonic shifts and erosion. The people answer in carvings, cairns and walls. Together they create a dialogue that has lasted longer than any written record. And somewhere in that dialogue, in the overlapping marks of nature and humanity, we might find the earliest stirrings of what we call civilization, the moment when observation became understanding and understanding became expression. As glaciers retreat, more of these ancient stones are appearing, uncovered after centuries under ice. Some bear carvings so faint they vanish when touched by sunlight. Others are split by frost, their surfaces fragmenting into new shapes. The earth is releasing its memories slowly, almost reluctantly. It's as if the mountains reveal only what they think we're ready to see. Every new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, but also raises new questions. How much of what we see now is the result of human hands, and how much is the mountain's own artistry? Can we truly separate the two after so much time intertwined? The Himalayas don't offer easy answers. They ask for patience instead. They remind us that every stone, no matter how small, holds within it the record of forces far larger than ourselves. Whether carved by nature or by humans, each bears the same message, that time leaves its mark on everything, and that to exist at all is to participate in that marking. The stones that speak of time are not speaking to us alone. They speak to everything that will come after, carrying the faint echo of hands, tools and thoughts across ages. And as we move deeper into their valleys, following the trails of rock and memory, we begin to sense that the story written in stone is still unfolding, each tremor, each thaw, each human step adding another line to the record. When snow melts in the Himalayas, it doesn't simply disappear, it remembers where it came from. Each drop carries with it the story of an age, the dust of deserts, the trace of wind-blown ash, the faint chemical signatures of a world that has changed and changed again. Meltwater is not just water, it's history made liquid. It moves quietly through cracks, trickles into streams, and eventually gathers into rivers that sustain billions of lives far away from where it began. Yet as it flows, it leaves something behind, tiny residues of what the mountains have held for millennia. These remnants form what some scientists call the meltwater memory, the slow release of Earth's deep past, one thaw at a time. The Himalayan glaciers are often described as frozen archives, storing within their ice the record of climates, atmospheres, and ecosystems long vanished. Each layer of snow that fell thousands of years ago still rests beneath the new ones, compressed into clear blue ice, perfectly preserved. When the ice melts, those trapped molecules, carbon, dust, pollen, even microscopic organisms, are set free. It's as though the mountains are exhaling the past into the present. Every drop that falls from a glacier's edge carries information about how the world once was, what the air contained, how much warmth the sun gave, what forests stood where now there is stone. To stand near the mouth of a glacier is to hear the sound of time dissolving. The water doesn't rush like a river, it trickles and drips, steady and deliberate, as if reluctant to leave. Sometimes under the right light, you can see small bubbles escaping from the ice, tiny spheres of ancient air finally released after thousands of years in silence. They pop soundlessly, unnoticed by anyone but the few who come close enough to listen. In that small gesture, air leaving ice, lies the connection between past and future, a physical thread of continuity no story could invent. But as the climate warms, this release is accelerated. What once took centuries now happens in decades. Glaciers are shrinking, retreating higher each year, their meltwater feeding rivers earlier and faster. For now, that abundance feels generous. The rivers swell in summer, feeding crops, turning turbines, filling reservoirs. But it's a temporary generosity. The more the glaciers melt, the less they'll have to give in the future. The Himalayas, sometimes called the Third Pole for their vast ice reserves, are losing mass faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. The consequences reach far beyond their valleys, from the rice fields of India to the deltas of Bangladesh. The meltwater memory is being spent faster than it can be renewed. What the ice leaves behind, though, may be as significant as what it releases. As glaciers retreat, they uncover ground that hasn't seen the sky for thousands of years. New valleys appear, littered with rocks polished smooth by ice, their surfaces still carrying the scratches of movement. Some reveal remnants of forests, twisted trunks, flattened roots, the ghosts of ancient woodlands that grew during warmer periods. Others expose layers of dark soil rich in organic matter, filled with pollen from plants long extinct. It's a strange reversal. The deeper the ice melts, the older the world beneath becomes. In recent years, researchers have discovered remains of ancient animals emerging from Himalayan ice, yak ancestors, birds, even small mammals perfectly preserved, their fur intact, their last meals still in their stomachs. These are not mythical creatures frozen in legend. They're real evidence of life that once thrived at altitudes now barren. Each specimen adds another line to the mountain's biography. In their tissues, scientists can read shifts in temperature, humidity, and vegetation over thousands of years. The glaciers, it turns out, are not static prisons of ice. They are time capsules opening themselves slowly, piece by piece, as the Earth warms. Occasionally, the ice yields something more personal. In a few rare cases, human remains have been found in high-altitude ice fields. Travellers, monks, perhaps traders caught by storms centuries ago. Their clothes, tools, and even footprints remain intact, as if frozen in mid-journey. In one region of western Tibet, explorers stumbled upon a set of footprints leading across a melting slope. They were small, likely made by a child and perfectly preserved in the ice. Radiocarbon dating placed them at more than 12,000 years old. For a moment, the past felt impossibly close. You could imagine the child walking across soft snow, leaving marks that no one would see again until now. The glacier had remembered what history had forgotten. Beyond these rare discoveries, the meltwater itself holds subtler information. Scientists collect samples from glacial streams and analyse their chemical composition, looking for isotopes and trace elements. These reveal how long the water has been locked in ice and what kinds of minerals it has passed through. In some cases, the data points to cycles far older than human civilization, volcanic eruptions, cosmic dust, even the faint imprint of solar fluctuations recorded in trapped gases. Each molecule becomes a messenger from another era. The term meltwater memory isn't metaphorical, it's measurable. The memory also extends to the land the ice leaves behind. When a glacier retreats, it reshapes everything around it. It scours rock, creates ridges, and leaves behind moraines, long winding hills of debris carried by ice. These moraines act as geological signatures, marking the glacier's former reach. Over time, they become overgrown with grass and trees, blending into the landscape until only a trained eye can see them. To the people who live nearby, these ridges are familiar landmarks, used as pathways, terraces, or grazing grounds. They walk every day across the physical evidence of the planet's memory, often without realizing it. But some do realize it, in their own way. In many Himalayan villages, the melting of glaciers is seen not just as an environmental event, but as a spiritual one. People say the mountains are weeping, that the world's balance is shifting. Rituals are held to honour the glaciers, to ask them to remain, to forgive whatever has angered them. Offerings are left near meltwater streams, butter lamps, rice, prayer flags, as gestures of reconciliation. These traditions, though ancient, align with a modern truth. The glaciers are indeed changing, and what they reveal as they go may alter our understanding of both past and future. As scientists continue their studies, they're finding more than climate data. They're finding evidence of early human activity intertwined with the glaciers themselves. In some high valleys, layers of ash have been found buried within the ice, traces of fires that burned more than 10,000 years ago. The source could be natural lightning strikes, but it could also be human. Small camps built during warmer periods, when people ventured higher to hunt or gather. The ash and soot preserved in the ice form a timeline of human presence that stretches back farther than we ever imagined. In those faint black layers, you can see the fingerprints of our species pressing into the planet's history. What's striking is how often the evidence of ancient human life appears at the boundaries of glaciers, never deep within the ice, but along its shifting edge. That makes sense. The edge is where the world changes most visibly. It's where water and stone meet, where danger and opportunity coexist. Early humans would have found resources there: fresh water, animals drawn to the melt, shelter in newly exposed caves. The glaciers, moving forward and backward with the centuries, would have repeatedly covered and uncovered those places, preserving fragments of the lives lived there. Every retreat brings those traces closer to light. There's a haunting quality to this slow unveiling. The ice gives up its secrets reluctantly, as if aware that once they're gone, they can't be replaced. Scientists race to collect samples, to document what they can before it vanishes. Cores of ancient ice are drilled and stored in frozen archives, attempts to preserve a record that nature is erasing faster each year. Yet even as we save these samples, the process feels like a loss. The memory that once lived in the mountains themselves is being transferred, second-hand, into laboratories far away. The glaciers, which once held their knowledge in silence, are speaking through disappearance. Among the most fascinating discoveries emerging from this research is the possibility that glacial melt may have influenced early patterns of human settlement. When ice sheets retreated after the last ice age, they released torrents of water that carved new river valleys. These valleys, rich in fresh sediment, became fertile corridors that attracted migrating groups. In the Himalayas, such meltwater pathways likely connected high-altitude refugees to the plains below, guiding early humans along predictable routes of abundance. In that sense, the melting of glaciers wasn't just an environmental event, it was an architect of civilization. The rivers that later nourished the Indus and Ganges valleys may have been born from these ancient thaws. Somewhere deep within the ice, there may still be records of the first interactions between humans and these changing landscapes. Tiny particles of charcoal from campfires, microscopic fibres from woven clothing, traces of pollen from cultivated plants, all are within reach of modern instruments. When found, they tell us that humans were not just passive observers of glacial cycles, but active participants in the rhythms of melting and freezing. Our ancestors adapted to the pulse of the planet, moving with its breath. The glaciers expanded, they descended. The glaciers melted, they followed the rivers. That movement shaped the very idea of home. The meltwater itself also holds practical importance for the present. As it flows into the great rivers of Asia, it sustains nearly half of the world's population. But its timing is changing. Where once the snowmelt arrived gradually through the year, it now comes in sudden bursts, causing floods downstream and shortages later. The same processes that preserved the memory of the past are now rewriting the balance of the future. It's as if the mountain's slow archive has turned into a rapid broadcast, too fast for the systems built around it. In this way, the meltwater memory is both a gift and a warning. It gives us data, fossils, artifacts, glimpses of the earliest human presence in the high world. but it also reminds us how fragile that presence is. The same thaw that reveals the past also threatens the future. The water that carries ancient pollen also carries modern pollutants. The rivers that once spread life now also spread uncertainty. The Himalayas are telling us through their melt that memory is not a fixed thing. It changes with the temperature. And yet there's something deeply poetic in this transformation. The same process that erases also reveals. As the glaciers shrink, they uncover new ground, exposing valleys that have been sealed since the dawn of human memory. In some of these newly opened spaces, scientists have found remnants of ancient soil that may still contain seeds, dormant, frozen, waiting. If they germinate, they will be plants from another time, reborn into a warmer world. Life continues the conversation, speaking again through what the ice remembers. The people who live near these glaciers understand this paradox better than anyone. They rely on the meltwater for survival, but they also know it must be respected. In villages like Thame in Nepal or Zanskar in India, the first trickle of spring melt is celebrated quietly. Monks gather near the water's edge to bless it, chanting words that have echoed through centuries. Children fill small vessels with the cold water, sprinkling it over fields and homes. It's not a grand ceremony, just a recognition that what flows now has flowed forever, that this water has been through cycles of ice, vapour, and rain more times than anyone can count. It's a way of honouring the continuity, even as everything changes. When night falls in those valleys, you can sometimes hear the faint sound of meltwater running beneath the ice. It's an intimate noise, soft and constant like breathing. Some say it's the sound of the mountain dreaming, replaying its memories as it sleeps. Others call it the voice of the ancestors, whispering through the cracks. For scientists, it's the movement of energy, the natural flow of phase and temperature. For everyone, it's a reminder that nothing stays frozen forever. Not ice, not time, not even the stories we tell about both. The Himalayas are often described as the roof of the world, but perhaps it's more accurate to think of them as its reservoir, not just of water, but of memory. Every drop that leaves the mountains carries something with it, something we may not see, but which sustains us nonetheless. As it joins rivers and oceans, it becomes part of a larger circulation, returning eventually to the peaks as snow. The cycle repeats endlessly, each loop writing and rewriting the same story, that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. And so the meltwater continues to flow, carrying the history of the earth through the veins of the planet. The mountains release it without hesitation, as they always have, trusting that the memory it holds will find its way into the world again. Through rivers, through life, through us. Somewhere downstream, someone drinks from that water, unaware that within it lie the molecules of ancient storms, the breath of forests long gone, perhaps even the trace of a human fire that burned when the ice was young. The mountain's memory becomes our own, a quiet inheritance still moving, still teaching, still alive. There are stories that rise wherever water falls. They begin as memories of rain, of rivers changing course, of storms that refuse to end. In every culture, in every language, there are versions of the same event, a flood that erased the world and forced life to begin again. It's tempting to think of these as myths, shaped by imagination and fear. But when you stand in the shadow of the Himalayas, you realize that floods of unimaginable scale are not legends here. They are part of the mountain's nature. The earth has sent walls of water down these valleys more than once, and each time those who survived told the story until it became timeless. The Himalayas hold the sources of the great rivers that feed half the planet, but those rivers are not always gentle. They are born from ice and gravity, from heat and time, and they carry both creation and destruction in their flow. When a glacial lake bursts, it can unleash more power than any storm. Entire valleys have been swept clean within hours, forests stripped, villages erased. For those who lived through such moments, the world truly did end. The mountains are both cradle and catastrophe. They give life through water, and they remind that nothing is ever truly safe from change. In the highlands of Nepal, there are stories passed down through families about a flood that came without warning. The sky was clear, they say, but the mountains groaned. The sound grew until it filled the air, and then the water arrived. Black, cold, and full of stones. It came not from the sky, but from the glacier itself, as though the mountain had broken open. Whole valleys were swallowed, leaving only silence when the water receded. It's not just folklore. Geological studies show that these glacial lake outburst floods, known as glophes, have happened repeatedly throughout the region's history. The last few centuries have seen smaller ones, but the ancient deposits tell of events far beyond our memory. In those times, the floods could have reached hundreds of kilometres downstream, changing the course of entire rivers. When you compare these events to the great flood myths of the world, the parallels are hard to ignore. In Hindu tradition, there's the story of Manu, the first man who was warned by a small fish about an approaching deluge. The fish told him to build a boat, to gather all living things and to wait until the water subsided. When the flood came, Manu's vessel was guided by the same fish, who revealed himself as a form of Vishnu. After the waters retreated, Manu stepped onto a new land, where life began again. The story is often told as a moral tale about faith and renewal, but it's also geographically rooted. The flood is said to have come from the north, from the mountains. For ancient people living along the Himalayan rivers, that direction held real danger. Across the mountains in Tibet there are similar accounts. Some texts describe entire valleys submerged beneath rising waters, with only the highest peaks remaining visible. Those who escaped did so by climbing into caves or onto ridges, where they watched the world vanish below. When the water finally receded, it left behind new lakes, new soil, and a new order. To this day, many of those lakes exist, filling ancient basins formed by glacial floods. Locals still tell stories about how they came to be, speaking of dragons, spirits, or gods who once lived beneath them. The details differ, but the structure is the same. The mountain releases its stored water, and humanity must begin again. Floods shape both land and memory. Sediment cores taken from Himalayan lakes reveal layers of coarse material interspersed with fine clay, clear evidence of sudden inundation followed by calm. Each layer corresponds to a flood, a moment when everything was rearranged. When scientists date these layers, they find that many coincide with periods of abrupt climate change, the end of the last ice age for instance, or episodes of rapid warming. It's during these intervals that glaciers melt more quickly, forming unstable lakes dammed only by ice or loose rock. One day the pressure becomes too great, and the barrier gives way. The flood that follows carries centuries of accumulated memory downstream in a single surge. Imagine what that would look like to someone living in one of the high valleys thousands of years ago. There would be no warning. The ground would shake, a deep vibration moving through the air before the sound reached the ears. Then the wind would change direction, rushing ahead of the oncoming wall of water. Trees would bow, birds would scatter, and the first sight of the flood would look like the sky itself collapsing. No wonder such moments became divine in retelling. How else could people explain power on that scale? They gave it names: gods of rivers, dragons of ice, serpents of rain. In myth, those forces became conscious, because it was easier to live with a god than with randomness. The recurring theme across flood legends is not just destruction, but renewal. The water rises, erases, and then recedes, leaving behind fertile soil. In the case of real floods, that part is also true. The sediments deposited by glacial outbursts are rich in minerals, rejuvenating the valleys for new growth. Early agricultural communities might have found opportunity in disaster, planting crops in the newly formed floodplains. Over generations, the cycle of loss and fertility would have become part of their worldview. The earth destroys, the earth provides. It's a pattern that matches both faith and geology. Even in regions far from the Himalayas, echoes of these mountain floods appear. Mesopotamian legends speak of a deluge sent by the gods, a story later echoed in other traditions. Some scholars speculate that these accounts may have distant roots in the same climatic events. The melting of glaciers, the rise of seas, and the floods that reshaped river systems across Asia. It's possible that travellers and traders carried not just goods but memories, retelling what their ancestors had experienced in the high places. As the stories spread, they transformed to fit new landscapes but kept the same heartbeat. Water rising beyond control, life forced to begin anew. In the Himalayan context, the floods also left physical traces beyond the myths. High on the valley walls of Nepal and northern India, you can find lines of boulders and sediments stranded hundreds of meters above current rivers. These are the remnants of ancient lake beds, left behind when glacial lakes burst their confines. Some are so vast that entire towns now sit on what were once lake bottoms. Villagers digging foundations sometimes unearth layers of rounded stones and clay that tell of former floods. The landscape carries the memory of water in its very shape. There are even places where you can see the exact path of a vanished flood. Wide, flat channels cut through solid rock, now dry and filled with grass. From a distance they look like ordinary valleys, but their size gives them away. They are too wide for the small streams that run through them today. They were carved in hours by walls of water hundreds of meters high. The rivers that replaced them are only remnants, trickles in the shadow of their former selves. The scientific explanation for these ancient floods is well understood now, but that doesn't make them less astonishing. As glaciers melt, they often leave behind pockets of trapped water, blocked by natural dams of ice or debris. Over time, the water level rises until the pressure becomes unbearable. When the dam fails, the release is sudden and violent. The resulting flood can travel at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers an hour, carrying boulders the size of houses. Everything in its path is swept away. In modern times, such events are rare, but they still happen. In the past, when glaciers were larger and valleys narrower, they would have been far more common and far more devastating. The people who live here have always known this, even before the language of science existed. Their stories serve as records, warnings disguised as parables. When elders tell of valleys that drowned or mountains that cracked open, they are not just preserving myth, they are transmitting environmental memory. Oral history is the mountain's human counterpart, another form of archive, one that moves through voice rather than stone. For example, in the highlands of Bhutan, there's a tale about a goddess who wept so long that her tears filled the valley. The people, seeing the water rise, fled to higher ground. When they looked back, their homes were gone, replaced by a lake. The goddess's sorrow had created a new landscape. That lake exists today, known for its clear blue water. Scientific analysis of its sediments shows evidence of a massive flood event about 8,000 years ago. The story and the science align perfectly, separated only by language. The tears were meltwater. The sorrow was gravity. The meaning remains the same. Elsewhere in western Nepal, another story speaks of a mountain spirit angered by the noise of human activity. To silence them, he released the water he had kept trapped in ice. The flood that followed forced the people to abandon the valley. But when they returned generations later, they found the soil rich and fertile. From then on, they built small shrines near glaciers, offering quiet songs instead of loud festivals. The legend is a reminder to live in balance, not to take too much from the mountain. Embedded within it is an ecological principle: disturbance invites consequence. It's remarkable how often these myths contain observations that science would later confirm. They describe flood patterns, landslides, and even atmospheric changes in metaphorical language, but with precise insight. A story about the sky growing heavy before a flood mirrors what we know about the build-up of pressure behind ice dams. Tales of animals behaving strangely before disaster match what modern sensors detect as subtle vibrations preceding glacial collapse. In their own way, the myths serve as early models of environmental understanding. They translate complex natural behaviour into narratives that human communities could remember and pass on. Floods, both real and remembered, also shaped migration. Archaeological studies suggest that some of the earliest human movements through the Himalayan foothills correspond with periods of increased flooding and glacial retreat. When water destroyed one region, it opened another. Valleys scoured clean by floods became new corridors of travel, lined with fresh soil and new vegetation. Populations followed the rivers as they settled into new courses. In that sense, the flood was not just a destroyer, but a guide, pushing humanity outward, spreading life along its path. In the wider scope of Earth's history, floods are engines of renewal. They erase the old to make room for the new. The Himalayas, in their constant state of melting and motion, have witnessed countless versions of this process. Each generation experiences it differently, as myth, as disaster, as opportunity. The mountains remember all of it. The stones still hold the marks of where water once reached. The sediments still tell of currents strong enough to move mountains. When you look closely at the rock faces, you can see patterns of erosion that look almost like waves frozen in time. The mountain itself carries the shape of the flood. Today, as glaciers retreat faster than ever recorded, some scientists warn that new floods may be forming again. Satellite images show lakes growing behind unstable ice walls, held in place by nothing more than temperature and chance. The people who live downstream know what that means. They don't need scientific reports to sense the danger. They've inherited the stories. They understand that water remembers where it once went. When they build new homes, they look at the old flood lines on the rock and choose higher ground. Myth, in this case, becomes survival strategy. It's humbling to realise that the great flood legends, told by firelight, whispered in monasteries carved into temple walls, may be echoes of real events written by nature. The mountain has always been a storyteller. It speaks in water and stone, in cycles of abundance and absence. We translate those stories into human language and call them myths, but they remain the same at their core. The reminder that the world can begin again, that loss and renewal are inseparable. As you travel through the Himalayas, you can sense this duality everywhere. Rivers that look serene carry sediments from ancient cataclysms. Quiet valleys once roared with water. Lakes that mirror the sky were born from destruction. Every drop in the mountains is both memory and potential. The people who live here understand that deeply. They do not fear the flood as much as they respect its inevitability. To them, the earth's power is not cruelty but balance. When the rains come each year and the rivers swell, they recite prayers not to stop the water, but to remind themselves of its rhythm. The same water that once erased their ancestors' homes now feeds their fields. The same force that carved disaster also carved life. That understanding that destruction and creation are part of the same cycle is perhaps the oldest lesson the mountains have given humanity. And so the legends endure. They travel down the rivers with each new generation, retold in schools and shrines, in conversations beside fires and in songs carried by wind. Each retelling keeps the memory alive, not just of past floods, but of the fragile balance that sustains life here. The mountains don't need to speak for themselves. The people, the rivers, and the stories do it for them. Together they form one long narrative of water and time. A memory that began in ice, was released in flood, and continues still, flowing quietly toward whatever the next beginning will be. The idea that civilizations might lie hidden beneath the Himalayas sounds like something born from fantasy, the kind of thought whispered around campfires when the wind grows loud and imagination has time to wander. Yet, as science has reached further into the folds of these mountains, the boundary between myth and evidence has thinned in unexpected ways. The question has never been whether life existed here. It always has. But how much of that life we have yet to uncover? The Himalayas are not merely peaks and valleys. They're a geological labyrinth, their slopes hiding layers of history deeper than any library or ruin we've yet explored. When scientists talk about lost civilizations, they don't mean cities of gold or mythical kingdoms untouched by time. They mean societies whose traces have been erased by nature's own hand. In a region where the ground itself is constantly moving, it's entirely possible for entire settlements to vanish beneath landslides, floods, or the slow creep of glaciers. Archaeologists often say that absence is not proof of emptiness. In the Himalayas, it's a rule of survival. The mountains hide what they create, folding it back into themselves until only subtle clues remain. A piece of pottery in a riverbank, a wall buried under centuries of debris, a strand of human DNA trapped in soil that once held a home. Over the last few decades, the study of these clues has become more sophisticated. Tools that once belonged only to imagination are now real. Satellites that can read the ground through layers of soil, drones that can map entire valleys invisible to the naked eye, chemical tests that can detect ancient fire pits from microscopic residues. With these instruments, scientists have begun to find signs that human history in the Himalayas stretches far beyond what we used to think. In one high-altitude site in western Nepal, excavations revealed traces of human presence dating back at least 30,000 years. The discovery surprised everyone. It placed humans in an environment thought too harsh for habitation at that time. The soil held remnants of hearths, animal bones, and fragments of stone tools, all preserved by cold and dryness. To live there would have required incredible adaptation, not just to temperature, but to altitude, thin oxygen, and limited resources. Yet these early people did it. They built fires, hunted, and likely travelled seasonally through valleys that today feel almost untouched. It means that the story of civilization in this region does not begin in the fertile plains below, but in the mountains themselves, in the places most would call uninhabitable. As research continued, similar findings appeared in other valleys: caves in Tibet, terraces in Ladakh, riverbanks in Bhutan. Each site offered fragments, never a complete picture, but together they began to form a pattern, a quiet outline of human persistence high above the world's easier places. The science that emerges from these fragments doesn't claim to have found hidden empires. Instead, it reveals something subtler, a long, continuous human presence woven into the evolution of the land itself. Part of what makes the Himalayas so difficult to study is that they are still alive geologically. The crust moves, earthquakes rearrange the surface, and erosion carries away whatever might have been left on it. Archaeological sites here don't survive in the way they do in deserts or plains. Instead, they're folded, buried, and sometimes remade into new layers of rock. When scientists drill cores into the ground, they find traces of human activity mixed with sediments from floods and landslides, fragments of charcoal, pollen from cultivated plants, bones from domesticated animals. Each sample is a blurred photograph of a moment in time, distorted by movement but still recognizable. One of the most revealing tools in this search is a branch of genetics known as ancient DNA analysis. By extracting genetic material from soil, bone, and even calcified plaque on teeth, researchers can reconstruct the ancestry of long-vanished populations. In the Himalayas, this has led to startling insights. Genetic traces show that the people living in these valleys today descend from multiple waves of migration, some from the south, some from the north, and some from lineages older than either. The diversity suggests that the mountains were not a barrier but a meeting place, where ancient peoples exchanged genes, knowledge, and ways of surviving. It paints a picture of a region more interconnected than isolation would imply, and that connection may go back further than civilization itself. In a Tibetan cave system, scientists discovered fragments of a jawbone belonging to a Denisovan, a close cousin of modern humans, more than 160,000 years old. This single fossil changed what we knew about where our species and its relatives lived. It proved that humans, or near humans, had reached high altitude long before we thought possible. Geneticists later found that modern Tibetans carry a particular gene inherited from those Denisovans, allowing them to live comfortably in thin air. In other words, the adaptation that makes life possible in the Himalayas today came from an ancient people who lived here before us. Their legacy is literally in our blood. The science of hidden civilizations is not just about stones and ruins, it's about inheritance written inside the body. As technology improves, scientists can detect traces of human presence in places where no artifacts remain. A handful of soil taken from a cave floor can reveal what species once lived there, what plants grew nearby, even what people might have eaten. When researchers analysed soil from Himalayan caves, they found DNA belonging to barley, yaks, and sheep, clear signs of early domestication at high altitude. Barley is particularly significant. It's one of the oldest cultivated grains in the world, and genetic studies show that the variety grown in the Tibetan plateau may have been adapted locally thousands of years before it appeared elsewhere. That means early farmers in the Himalayas were not merely recipients of agricultural knowledge from the lowlands. They were innovators in their own right, shaping crops to survive in the cold. Civilization, it seems, was growing in two directions, upward as well as outward. Archaeology in these regions is as much patience as science. Excavations can take years just to remove a few meters of debris, and often the clues are minute. A discoloration in soil, a fragment of charcoal, a shard of pottery so worn it looks like ordinary stone. Yet each small find carries immense weight. A single bead can reveal trade, a single hearth can mark the edge of a settlement. When combined, these fragments hint at communities that may have lasted generations, perhaps millennia. The absence of grand architecture doesn't mean simplicity. It may mean a different kind of sophistication, one focused on adaptation rather than monument building, survival rather than expansion. In recent years, researchers have begun using remote sensing technology to map regions where on-foot exploration is impossible. LIDAR, a laser-based scanning method, can penetrate forest cover and even layers of sediment to reveal buried structures. In the foothills near the Himalayan front, LIDAR has revealed geometric patterns, terraces, walls, and possible dwellings, now hidden by centuries of landslides. Some appear to predate known historical settlements. It's too early to know what they represent, but they suggest that complex societies once lived closer to the mountains than we thought. They may not have left written records, but the landscape still carries their signature. When scientists study these findings, they use the term paleo-civilization, not a lost city, but a stage of human organisation that predates what we think of as civilization. These were societies capable of agriculture, trade and community, but not yet dependent on the scale or permanence that would later define urban life. In other words, they represent the threshold, the moment when humanity began to settle, experiment, and plan for futures beyond survival. The Himalayas may have been one of the crucibles where that transformation began. There's a growing hypothesis that the mountains played a direct role in shaping the development of human culture. The constant environmental pressure, thin air, limited resources, unpredictable weather may have driven innovation. Communities have to think differently to endure. They learn to read landscapes, predict weather from cloud movement, preserve food through long winters, and navigate by stars when valleys flooded. These adaptations, passed through generations, became cultural intelligence, the seed from which later civilizations could grow. In that sense, the harshness of the mountains was not a barrier to progress, but its catalyst. Some evidence even suggests early long-distance communication between Himalayan cultures and lowland civilizations. Obsidian from Central Asia has been found in the foothills of Nepal, while coral and shells from the Indian Ocean appear in high-altitude sites. These materials could only have arrived through trade networks spanning hundreds of kilometres. Such connections hint at organised routes and shared understanding, long before the appearance of formal roads or empires. The mountains may have been remote, but they were never isolated. They were bridges between worlds. One of the most intriguing discoveries comes from the study of myths themselves. Anthropologists analysing oral traditions across the Himalayan arc have identified recurring motifs, stories of migrations, floods, and lost valleys that appear in multiple languages and regions. When cross-referenced with geological and genetic data, many of these stories align with real events: glacial retreats, floods, and periods of climatic transition. It suggests that myth may serve as an early form of record-keeping, preserving memory across generations long after physical evidence is gone. In that light, the hidden civilizations may not be lost entirely. They may live on in language, in ritual, and in the habits of those who still call the mountains home. To understand how civilization might hide in the Himalayas, it helps to think of how quickly the land can change. A single landslide can bury an entire settlement beneath meters of rock. Over time, new vegetation grows, rivers change course, and the evidence becomes invisible. Earthquakes create new terraces and seal caves. Glaciers grind the surface smooth. What looks like untouched wilderness may simply be a palimpsest, an overwritten landscape where each generation of humans leaves faint traces beneath the next. For archaeologists, this means that every discovery is partial, every absence uncertain. The mountain hides as much as it reveals. Modern climate change has added a new twist to this process. As ice and permafrost melt, objects buried for centuries are re-emerging. Tools, bones, even entire sections of wooden structures. Some are so well preserved that they still carry the marks of hands that shaped them. In these moments, the line between myth and material evidence dissolves. The mountain's secrets are returning, one thaw at a time. The science behind these findings is precise, but the experience of uncovering them remains emotional. Imagine being the first person in thousands of years to hold a tool left behind by someone who lived in a world unrecognizable to us. The air, the animals, even the stars would have been different. Yet the shape of the handle fits a human grip perfectly. It's a small but unmistakable continuity, proof that despite the ages between us, the human need to make, to build, to endure remains unchanged. The idea of hidden civilizations is no longer confined to speculation. It's a growing field of study that combines geology, genetics, archaeology, and climate science. Together they form a new way of reading the mountains, not as silent guardians of myth, but as participants in humanity's earlier story. Each layer of ice, each terrace, each cave contains pieces of that story, scattered but recoverable. The more we find, the more it seems that the Himalayas were never a backdrop to civilization, but a chapter within it, one we're only beginning to decipher. And as we uncover that chapter, it changes our sense of what civilization means. It's not just cities and writing and monuments. It's also adaptation, cooperation, memory. The shared effort to live with the earth rather than against it. The hidden civilizations of the Himalayas may not have built empires, but they built endurance. And in doing so, they laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The science continues to advance, but even now there's humility in the search. The mountains are not eager to give up their secrets. They yield them slowly as if testing our patience. Each discovery leads to another question, another mystery folded into stone and ice. Perhaps that's fitting. Civilization itself has always been an unfinished story, a process of emergence and rediscovery. The Himalayas remind us of that what is hidden is not gone, that what is lost may still speak, and that beneath the highest peaks, the earth keeps records of its first experiments with being human, waiting quietly for us to learn how to read them. If you spend enough time among the Himalayas, something begins to shift in the way you see them. At first, they seem vast beyond comprehension, indifferent, almost alien in their scale. But slowly, as your eyes adjust to their rhythms, the slow drift of clouds, the sound of meltwater, the smell of rock warming in the sun, you start to sense something else. It isn't that the mountains change, it's that they begin to reflect you back at yourself. Every emotion, every question, every flicker of restlessness finds its echo here. The mountains are not just landscapes, they're mirrors, vast and patient, returning whatever you bring to them. For centuries, people have travelled here not just to survive or to study, but to see themselves more clearly. Pilgrims, scientists, monks and wanderers all speak of the same strange awareness, that the Himalayas reveal not answers, but perspective. Standing beneath their peaks, you feel both infinitely small and deeply connected. It's a contradiction that defies language. The mountains seem to strip away everything unnecessary, leaving only what endures. There's a reason why so many philosophies and spiritual traditions took shape in their shadow. When early ascetics climbed into these valleys to meditate, they weren't seeking isolation for its own sake. They were trying to enter into dialogue with something that didn't change when everything else did. The stillness of the mountains is deceptive. Beneath it lies motion, glaciers creeping, stones shifting, rivers carving new paths. Yet to the human eye they appear eternal. That illusion of permanence, contrasted with our own brief lives, draws reflection naturally. To live here is to live beside time itself, slowed into visible form. Monasteries built along the slopes of Ladakh or Bhutan seem to grow directly out of the cliffs, their white walls and prayer flags part of the same pattern as the rock. The people who built them weren't trying to impose order on the landscape, they were joining it. Every line of architecture follows the contours of stone. Every path winds where the mountain allows. You can see the same principle in small homes tucked into valleys, their walls made from the same material that lies underfoot. The mountains teach humility through design. They remind those who dwell among them that all structures, human or otherwise, are temporary shapes within a larger rhythm. When you walk through one of these villages, the scale of life feels calibrated to coexistence rather than control. Children play along narrow paths carved between houses. Herders led yaks past low walls that have stood for generations, and above it all, peaks rise silently, indifferent to everything below. But within that indifference, there's a sense of peace. People here don't try to outlast the mountains. They live inside their reflection, accepting that endurance belongs to the land, not to the individual. That acceptance creates a kind of calm that can't be taught, only experienced. The mountains also mirror the human mind in their extremes. They are serene one moment and violent the next, clear in morning light and hidden by afternoon storms. Climbers often speak of the psychological intensity that comes with altitude, how thoughts grow sharper and emotions stronger. It's not just the lack of oxygen, it's the environment itself stripped of distraction. There's no noise, no constant movement, nothing to blur the edges of awareness. Every sound, a rock falling, a distant bird, stands out like punctuation in silence. It forces the mind to confront itself, to recognize its own shape. For those who study the Himalayas scientifically, the reflection is no less personal. Geologists, climatologists, and anthropologists come here seeking data, but what they often find is perspective. To measure glacier retreat is also to confront the fragility of the present moment. To map tectonic faults is to realize how temporary the ground beneath us really is. Science, like spirituality, begins to fold into humility. The mountain allows both, but favours neither. It reflects effort without judgment. In certain valleys, where ancient monasteries overlook winding rivers, there's a practice that blends meditation with observation. Monks will sit facing the horizon, watching the light change over the peaks for hours, sometimes days. They say it isn't about finding enlightenment, but about learning to see without expectation, to look at something so vast and unmoving, until the mind stops trying to define it. When that happens, the distinction between observer and observed fades, and what remains is simply awareness, clear, quiet, and steady as stone. It's a lesson the mountains give freely, though few have the patience to receive it. Even for those who aren't monks, the effect is similar. Travellers often describe a sense of stillness that follows them long after they've left. The sound of wind through the passes, the sight of stars uncountable in the cold night sky, the sheer presence of scale. It all lingers, softening the noise of daily life. Psychologists studying the effects of natural vastness on the human mind call this the awe response. It's a measurable state of consciousness in which the brain's usual focus on the self diminishes. In other words, the mountains literally quiet the ego. That silence, fleeting though it is, leaves space for perspective to return. The Himalayas have a way of revealing human patterns by contrast. Every footprint in snow, every path worn into stone, reminds you that we move quickly through a place that does not move at all. The same trails used by traders 1,000 years ago are still used today, each step reinforcing a connection between past and present. In that continuity, the mountain mirrors civilization itself, always changing in surface form, but constant in underlying rhythm. The technology may evolve, the beliefs may shift, but the need to understand, to reach upward, remains the same. To scientists exploring the deeper origins of those impulses, the mountains offer clues as much psychological as geological. Some theorists suggest that our fascination with mountains, our drive to climb or simply to look at them, is rooted in evolution. The open view from a height once meant safety and knowledge, a way to see predators, to map routes, to understand terrain. But beyond that, the elevation triggers a sense of perspective hardwired into our consciousness. From a height we see patterns we can't from below. The mountains, by their very nature, invite pattern recognition. They draw the mind outward and then back inward in the same movement. In many ways, the Himalayas reflect not only individuals but civilizations themselves. Empires have risen and fallen along their edges, and each one has projected its own meanings onto the peaks, seeing in them gods, borders, or symbols of power. Yet the mountains absorb all interpretations without changing. They remain themselves long after the languages that named them have vanished. That endurance can be unsettling. It forces societies to see the impermanence of their own structures. Perhaps that's why so many sacred texts written near these mountains speak of detachment. The realization that what seems permanent from one human lifetime is barely a moment in geological time. In the Himalayas, philosophy and geology share a horizon. Rocks rise and erode over millions of years, while human thought shifts across centuries. Both are slow, but not still. The same pressure that folds mountains also shapes cultures. The push and pull between creation and destruction, growth and collapse. When you study one long enough, you start to see the other mirrored within it. A mountain is not only a physical object, but a process, just as civilization is not a single moment, but a continuum. Both depend on balance, and both can fail when the balance breaks. Climbers often speak about how the higher they go, the more abstract time becomes. Hours stretch, days blend, and survival reduces life to essentials: breath, warmth, direction. The mind, stripped of its usual concerns, starts to feel the same way the landscape looks: vast, silent, and precise. At that point, the mountain becomes more than a destination. It becomes a reflection of consciousness itself, immense, layered, unpredictable, and indifferent. To climb it is not to conquer, but to encounter. The danger lies not only in falling, but in realizing how small we are within the scale of things. And yet, there's comfort in that realization. The mountain's mirror doesn't diminish us, it puts us in proportion. It reminds us that the same elements that shape it, heat, pressure, erosion, shape us too in different forms. Our bones carry the same minerals as the cliffs. Our blood carries salts once dissolved in ancient seas. The mountain doesn't stand apart from humanity. It contains the same story written at a different speed. When we look at it long enough, we begin to recognize ourselves not as separate observers, but as temporary expressions of the same ongoing process. This perspective isn't only spiritual, it's ecological. To see the mountain as a mirror is to understand that every action below reflects upward, and every change above returns downstream. When glaciers melt faster, the rivers flood. When forests are cut from foothills, the soil erodes. The mountain answers human behaviour not in punishment but in balance. What we do to it, we eventually see reflected in ourselves, in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the stability we rely on. The mirror is patient but exact. It keeps no secrets. Even the myths that grew around the Himalayas can be read as reflections of human psychology. The hidden kingdoms, the wrathful gods, the sacred peaks. They are projections of our own hopes and fears. In times of uncertainty, people imagine perfection hidden somewhere unreachable. In times of loss, they imagine the earth cleansing itself through flood or fire. The mountain provides the canvas, vast and silent, upon which these visions are painted. It's less that the Himalayas create myth, and more that they offer the space for myth to take form. Every culture that encounters them adds its own reflection to the surface. Modern explorers, despite all their instruments, are not immune to this effect. Scientists who spend months studying glaciers describe moments when they forget the boundaries of their work. They look out across the valleys and feel a pull that has nothing to do with data, a quiet awe that no measurement can contain. The longer they stay, the more the work becomes personal. The ice cores they extract, the soil they analyse, the fossils they find, each becomes a reflection not just of the planet's past but of humanity's present. The pursuit of knowledge becomes indistinguishable from the pursuit of meaning. The mountain accommodates both effortlessly. At night, when the sky above the Himalayas clears, the mirror widens. The stars seem closer here, their light sharper in the thin air. Entire constellations reflect in the black surfaces of glacial lakes. It's easy to understand why people once believed heaven touched earth in these places. The boundary between the physical and the infinite dissolves. Looking into that reflection, you feel a sense of continuity that transcends belief. The light you see left its source before civilization existed, yet it falls now on stones shaped by the same forces that built the world. The scale is incomprehensible, yet the experience is intimate. You are part of it simply by being here. When morning comes, the mountains look unchanged, but the light shifts, and everything seems new again. This repetition, sunrise, snow, shadow, is the mountain's way of reminding us that renewal doesn't require change. It requires attention. The same landscape, seen differently, reveals endless variation. The reflection is always moving because we are. What we notice depends on what we bring to the view. To the scientist, the glacier speaks of isotopes and carbon cycles. To the monk, it speaks of impermanence. To the traveller, it speaks of beauty and silence. The mountain accommodates every interpretation, returning it in kind. This is why the Himalayas have never belonged to a single people or tradition. They're open mirrors, reflecting whatever questions are brought to them. For some, they represent the threshold of the divine. For others, they are laboratories of the Earth's deep processes. For many, they are simply home. Each perspective is correct and incomplete. The mountain asks nothing, yet it offers everything in proportion to the humility of the gaze. As human presence continues to expand, more roads, more climbers, more research stations, the reflection grows crowded. The challenge now is to look without distorting what we see, to study without forgetting reverence, to build without assuming ownership. The mountains will continue to rise and erode long after we are gone. Their mirror will remain, waiting for the next consciousness to look into it and recognize the same truths. And so, the mountain reflects not only our image but our choices. In its snow, we see the trace of warming. In its rivers, we see our dependence. In its silence, we hear the echo of our own noise. It never speaks, but it never lies. To look at it is to look inward and to understand, even for a moment, that the earth is not something we stand upon, but something we are part of. The mountain holds its mirror steady. What we see there depends on how we choose to look, and how much we're willing to listen to the reflection that looks quietly back. Sometimes, when you stand in the high valleys of the Himalayas, the air feels alive. It moves differently than it does anywhere else. Slower, heavier, as if carrying something ancient within it. You feel it on your skin before you hear it, before you see the movement in the grass or the rippling of prayer flags stretched across stone walls. It's not just wind, it's the rhythm of temperature, pressure, and motion. Something so vast and constant that it almost feels like breathing. The earth itself inhales and exhales through these mountains. The air moves in cycles as ancient as the crust, rising with heat, falling with cold, repeating endlessly, carrying the memory of everything it has ever touched. To call it breath is not a metaphor. The atmosphere, like the lungs of a living body, takes in and releases. The forests on the southern slopes draw in carbon dioxide and exhale oxygen. The glaciers inhale snow and release rivers. The mountains absorb heat during the day and exhale it at night, creating winds that pulse across valleys like slow, deliberate sighs. Even earthquakes, the deep shifts of the planet's crust, follow rhythms of pressure and release. It is all breathing, in different forms, at different scales. The slow respiration of a planet alive in ways we're only beginning to understand. In the early morning, when the air is cold and still, the mountains seem to hold their breath. The sound of a river softens, the wind pauses, even the birds wait. Then, as the first light touches the peaks, warmth stirs the air and it begins again. This cycle of expansion and movement, the invisible exhalation of the world. Scientists studying microclimates in the Himalayas have recorded these shifts precisely. Temperature changes by just a few degrees can reverse the direction of valley winds. During the day, warm air rises, pulling cooler air up from below. At night, it sinks, sliding down the slopes like liquid. The result is a constant, gentle pulse that continues through every hour, every season. To live here is to live inside that pulse, to feel the planet's breath moving through you. It's easy to think of the Earth as solid and unchanging, but the Himalayas remind you otherwise. Everything here moves, the wind, the water, even the mountains themselves. The tectonic plates that built them are still pushing together, raising the peaks a few millimeters each year. At the same time, erosion wears them down, carrying dust and sediment into rivers that flow toward the sea. The material that once formed peaks eventually settles on ocean floors, where it will, over millions of years, become rock again, ready to rise in another age. The process is slow, but not still. The Earth breathes through movement, just at a scale too vast for our ordinary senses. To geologists, this balance of uplift and erosion is a kind of respiration, a planetary cycle of creation and release. The Himalayas rise as the Indian plate pushes beneath Asia, and as they rise, they alter wind patterns, rainfall, even global temperatures. Their height influences the monsoon, drawing moisture from the ocean and redistributing it across the continent. In turn, the monsoon feeds the glaciers, which feed the rivers, which feed the plains. Every breath of the earth here connects to every breath we take elsewhere. The Himalayas don't just shape weather, they shape life. When you trace that chain backward, it becomes clear that our own existence depends on these invisible exchanges. The oxygen in our blood, the food we grow, the water we drink, all carry the imprint of the mountain's breath. The carbon stored in its forests, the minerals in its soil, the ice melting from its glaciers, all return to the atmosphere, forming part of the global rhythm. It's easy to forget that breathing isn't only an individual act. It's participation in a much larger system. We inhale what the world exhales, and we exhale what it will breathe again. In the thin air of the Himalayas, that truth becomes visceral. Breathing takes effort here. Each inhale is a negotiation with altitude, each exhale a release of what little oxygen you can claim. Visitors often describe the experience as humbling, the realization that something so automatic can become difficult. The body has to adapt, increasing red blood cell production, altering metabolism, changing the way it uses energy. The people who live here have done this over generations. Their physiology reflects the mountain's rhythm, their lungs shaped by its thin breath. The science of high-altitude adaptation is, in a way, the science of synchronizing with the Earth's respiration. That synchronization goes beyond biology. The cultures of the Himalayas reflect the same awareness of cycles: day and night, summer and winter, growth and decay. Festivals align with planting and harvest, rituals with the changing of the winds, the blowing of conch shells at dawn, the spinning of prayer wheels in the afternoon, the lighting of butter lamps at dusk, all mirror natural transitions. Even the chants and mantras that echo through monasteries seem timed to the rhythm of breath itself. Long exhalations drawn from the chest, released slowly into thin air. Religion here isn't just belief, it's synchronization with the planet's pulse. When monks speak of stillness, they don't mean stopping motion. They mean aligning with it so completely that you no longer resist. The same idea applies to the way these communities build and live. Houses are designed to breathe with the weather, insulated with layers of earth that hold warmth by night and release it by day. Openings are placed to catch valley winds, allowing air to move freely through the rooms. Even the placement of villages follows the same pattern, never blocking the natural flow of air and water, always sitting beside it. The mountain breathes and life arranges itself around that fact. Scientists studying air circulation in the region sometimes refer to the Himalayas as Earth's lungs. The phrase is poetic, but it also describes a measurable reality. The forests on the southern slopes absorb vast amounts of carbon, while the glaciers regulate the flow of fresh water across the continent. Together, they stabilize atmospheric systems that reach as far as the Pacific and the Mediterranean. When those systems shift, when glaciers melt faster or forests thin, the effect ripples outward. In that sense, every breeze through the high passes is part of a global conversation, one that includes every living thing on the planet. The air that moves through these valleys isn't just wind. It carries particles of dust, pollen and salt from distant places. Microscopic analysis shows grains from deserts thousands of kilometers away, spores from tropical forests, even traces of ocean salt lifted by storms and carried across continents. When that air reaches the Himalayas, it collides with cold, rises, and drops its cargo as snow. Over time, that snow compresses into ice, trapping those particles in layers that scientists can later read like pages in a book. Within those layers are stories of volcanic eruptions, ancient droughts, industrial smoke, and forest fires. Each breath of air that touches the mountains leaves behind a signature. The ice keeps them all, remembering every inhalation the planet has ever taken. It's strange to think that the clean, cold air of the Himalayas, the air people travel thousands of miles to breathe, contains particles from almost everywhere else on Earth. It's a reminder that atmosphere knows no boundaries. The same molecules that once moved through a rainforest, a city, or an ocean are the ones filling your lungs here. The mountain's breath is not local, it's global. To breathe it is to share in something universal, a cycle that has continued for billions of years, across species and ages, through every rise and fall of the planet's surface. At night, when the wind changes and cold air slides down from the peaks, The movement becomes almost musical. It hums through valleys, rushes past cliffs and curls around monasteries perched on ledges. The sound is low and steady, like the distant ocean. In small villages, people sleep with their windows open to it, letting the night air pass through. It carries the scent of pine, dust, and smoke from fires burning far below. For many, it's the sound of safety, the reassurance that the world is still moving, still breathing. Silence here would be unnatural, unsettling, like a heartbeat that had stopped. There's a practical awareness of this balance in local traditions. Farmers and herders know how to read the air, to tell by its texture when weather will shift. They feel it change hours before the clouds appear. The air grows heavier or thinner, cooler or sharper, carrying a certain taste that signals what's coming. Their knowledge is precise, refined through generations of observation. For scientists, it's data. For them, it's intuition. Both describe the same thing, sensitivity to the Earth's breath. But the breath is changing. The temperature is rising. The air holds more moisture, and the seasonal winds no longer follow the patterns they once did. The mountains still breathe, but unevenly, like a tired lung. In some valleys, snow arrives late. In others, floods come early. The glaciers, which once exhaled rivers slowly and steadily, now release water too quickly. What was once balance has become fluctuation. The breath has grown shallow, strained. Scientists can measure it precisely in melting rates and temperature anomalies, but those who live here feel it directly. In the unpredictability of seasons, in the uneasy timing of rain. For them it isn't just environmental, it's personal. The mountain's breath sustains their crops, their herds, their rhythm of life. When it falters, so does everything else. Some respond with rituals, others with adaptation, planting new crops, moving higher, changing the way they store water. But beneath it all lies a quiet grief, a recognition that something ancient is shifting. The same cycles that gave life for thousands of years are becoming unstable. It's not the end of the world, but it's the end of a certain certainty. Yet even in this there is continuity. The Earth has changed before, warmed, cooled, risen, fallen. It has lost and regained balance countless times. The difference now is awareness. For the first time, we can see it happening in real time. We can measure the breath, trace its cause, and understand our role within it. That understanding brings both responsibility and awe. The planet isn't fragile in the way we often imagine. It's resilient beyond measure, but we are fragile within it. The balance we depend on is delicate, the air we share finite. The mountain doesn't need us to breathe, we need it. When people speak of the Himalayas as sacred, they may not mean it in a strictly religious sense. Sacredness here is a way of describing awareness, the recognition that you're standing inside something alive. Every sound, every gust of air, every shifting shadow belongs to a single, breathing system. To feel that is to understand that reverence isn't about worship, it's about participation. Breathing, walking, listening. These are all forms of connection. The mountain's breath moves through us as surely as through the trees and rivers. At certain times of year, when the snow melts just enough to expose new ground, small flowers appear on the slopes, blue, white, yellow, no larger than a coin. They bloom for only a few days before the next frost arrives. Locals call them the mountain sigh, saying they appear when the earth exhales warmth from deep within. It's a simple observation, but it captures the truth of the place, that every moment of beauty, every brief life, is part of a larger cycle that never truly ends. The mountain breathes out, the flowers rise, the air moves on. When you stand on a ridge at dusk and feel the temperature drop, there's a moment when everything aligns. The light fading, the wind shifting, the first stars appearing. The air seems to pause between breaths, suspended. In that pause, you can almost sense the scale of it all. The mountain breathing, the atmosphere circulating, the planet turning, each movement nested within another. It's not mystical, it's physical, measurable, real. But knowing that doesn't make it less profound. It makes it more so. If you listen long enough, you realise that the Himalayas are not silent at all. They are full of sound, just at frequencies slower than the ear can hear. The crack of a glacier, the vibration of stone after a distant quake, the whisper of wind over snow. All of it is motion. All of it is life. The Earth's breath is continuous, even when we are not aware of it. It connects every living thing, every particle of air, every mountain, every ocean. We are all suspended within it, moving together in one unending rhythm. And maybe that's what the Himalayas have been teaching all along, that the planet isn't something separate from us, that its breath and ours are the same, that every time we inhale we are sharing in the memory of mountains, forests and seas. The air that fills our lungs has touched everything, carried voices, pollen, ash and light from worlds we'll never see. It is the oldest traveller we know and the most intimate. It connects us not just to each other, but to every age of the earth that came before and every one that will follow. The mountain continues to breathe slowly, endlessly, carrying its memory forward. And we, for a brief moment within that infinite rhythm, breathe with it. The same air, the same pulse, the same quiet, unbroken life that has always been and always will be.